Well, it's lovely to be out on such a sunny evening in Edinburgh, but it's a shame that we have to be out tonight protesting against the two-child cap and the rate clause. Well more than a year since Alison Thulis, my colleague at Westminster, first spotted it in the small print of a Tory budget.
Very glad to see such a huge demonstration today and so many people still coming along 1 year after the rate clause came into force to show their opposition to this vile and despicable policy. The UK government have never been able to justify this policy, and we saw that this week with Esther McVeigh's pathetic attempts to say that the rate clause was somehow double support for women and that gives them some kind of chance to talk about the most appalling and disturbing experience of their life.
As you can see behind me, we're at the very beginning of the All Under One Banner rally. You can obviously hear the pipers behind me as events are about to kick off.
It's time to aim high, look resolutely outwards, and never, ever accept second best. Above all, it's time to believe that we can. We can build that better country we know is possible. And friends, we will.
If you enjoy watching our programmes, please help us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster by signing up to become a Broadcasting Scotland supporter.
Wherever you stand, get the fresh view of what's happening in Scotland with iScot. Celebrate everything about our country with intelligent, in-depth insight from lifestyle, culture to puzzles, and all the opinions you'll need. Whether it's digital or by post, subscribe now to iScot.
Thank you. The first item of business is portfolio questions. The usual mantra, short questions, succinct answers, and we'll get through everybody. Question 1, Pauline McNeill, please.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what action it can take to allow young people access to cheaper transport and what its position is in the discounts that are currently offered by the bus and train operators.
Cabinet Secretary.
The Scottish Government continues to take positive and targeted action to help young people access cheaper transport through initiatives such as the National Concessionary Travel Scheme for Young People, which offers discounts on bus and rail services. We welcome the range of discounted fares offered to young people by operators, which are a commercial matter for the individual bus operators, and on rail are offered under the terms of the ScotRail franchise contract. The Scottish Government is also seeking to introduce free bus travel for young modern apprentices and for young carers in receipt of the planned Young Carers Grant once it comes into force.
Pauline McNeill.
On turning 16, a young person is welcomed into adulthood by asking to be paid full fares on all public transport. Many young people at 16 are still not working, and at school the discounted fares the Minister talks about are not deep enough. Surely it's time to recognise that teenagers, 16 and 17-year-olds in particular, welcoming what the Minister has said on apprentices and carers across the board, need a fairer deal on buses, trains and ferries.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, the member will be aware that the National Concessionary Travel Scheme for Young People was introduced back in January 2017, and it's delivered through the Young Scot Smart Card programme. It provides all 16 to 18-year-olds and also full-time volunteers up to the age of 25 with discounts on bus travel. And there's also the rail discount rail card as well, which is available for young people. We're always keen to make sure that we try to support young people in being able to access public transport. Of course, a very specific measure which the member has proposed is one which no doubt will filter through in the process of which budget they want the additional money to come from in order to provide even further discounts over and above what we provide at the present time.
Question 2, Alec Rowley.
Presiding Officer, to ask the Scottish Government what progress has been made in advancing the case and funding for a new Levenmouth rail link.
Cabinet Secretary.
Transport Scotland is leading the transport appraisal work for the Levenmouth Sustainable Transport Study in close collaboration with Fife Council. The findings from the transport appraisal work will identify if there is a rationale for progressing the Levenmouth rail link. Since I last spoke on the study in Parliament, the initial appraisal report has been published and stakeholders have been updated on the findings of this report at sessions in November. Stakeholders continue to be updated monthly by email and on Transport Scotland's website. The draft preliminary options appraisal report, which includes rail link options, is currently being reviewed by Transport Scotland and Fife Council. The final stage is the detailed appraisal, the timescale for which very much depends on the outcome of the current stage.
Alec Rowley.
I welcome the progress that is now being made, and I hope that we can see that progress continue, because in terms of community support, there is strong support from the community. There is a recognition of the opportunities that this would bring, both economic and social. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary whether he would be willing to meet with the community organisation that's behind the campaign, come to Levenmouth? I understand he said he was meeting with one of the constituency SPs today to discuss that issue, but will he come to Levenmouth? The one thing that these people are clear about is this should be a non-partisan campaign, so could you come and meet
Cabinet
with everyone?
Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I've already given agreement to the request that came from the constituency member to visit Levenmouth, and actually last week when I was in Fife, I was actually approached by a member from the Levenmouth rail group asking if I would visit, and I confirmed to them I'm more than happy to do so. And I do recognise the cross-party support for this particular proposal, and no doubt as the work is taken forward, we'll be able to identify what is the best option in progressing this matter.
David Torrance.
To ask the Cabinet Secretary if you'd like Alex Rowley, if you'd visit my constituency to meet members of the Levenmouth rail campaign and see potential economic benefits a rail link would bring to the area of high deprivation.
Cabinet Secretary.
Yes.
Excellent. Question 3 has been withdrawn. Question 4, Annie Wells.
To ask the Scottish Government how it promotes active travel.
Cabinet Secretary.
The Scottish Government has doubled the active travel budget from £39.2 million in 2017-18 to £80 million in 2018-19 and 2019-20. The majority of this funding is allocated to local authorities to deliver high-quality walking and cycling infrastructure, enabling people to walk and cycle more. Our funding also includes more than £10 million to support local authorities and communities to deliver behavioural change programmes, including cycle training and increased access to bikes and facilities to encourage more people to walk and cycle. We've also recently appointed Scotland's first Active Nation Commissioner, Lee Craigie, who will become the national advocate for the benefits of walking and cycling, including for everyday short journeys.
Annie Wells.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. It's estimated that at the current rate of progress, it will take around 239 years to reach the Scottish Government's target for 10% of journeys to be made by bike by 2020. While setting an ambitious target is positive, and the steps that the Cabinet Secretary has already said, how will the Scottish Government ensure that the necessary support is in place to achieve it?
Cabinet Secretary.
I thought when the member said 239 years, she was talking about the Brexit negotiations, given the state of affairs. What I can say is that we have a very ambitious programme in taking forward driving up active travel. This was a stretch target which we set, one which is very ambitious. We have seen progress towards that, but clearly not at the speed at which we would all like to see it being made Hence the reason as to why we've doubled the budget in order to drive it forward in the coming years. And I'm very much committed to making sure we do everything we can to increase the number of people who are taking active travel options when it comes to taking journeys.
Claudia Beamish.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And while I welcome the doubling of the budget, I would like to highlight to the Cabinet Secretary that I visited the Community Links Plus South Cityway, which was supported on a cross-party basis. And I think accessibility and visibility were really inspiring there. Can the Cabinet Secretary tell us a bit more about how marginalised communities in these active travel opportunities will have affordable options?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I think the member raised a very important issue here, because it's important, and I've made this point on a number of occasions now, is that in helping to promote and encourage active travel, that we are reaching out to those hard-to-get-at communities and those individuals who may not initially think that they are going to take up an active travel option. In my recent discussion with the stakeholders who are responsible for taking this forward, one of the challenges that I've put to them is to demonstrate in greater detail how they are ensuring that they're reaching into our more deprived communities to ensure that they are providing them with the options to look at greater active travel options. So, for example, where we've got social housing provision being made available, is looking at how we can build into that infrastructure the necessary provision to help to support active travel. Whether that be cycle routes or walking routes, can we work with housing associations, look at creating e-bike hubs? Can we also look at the introduction of, for example, the provision of electric vehicles through a car club model, which could be delivered through social housing as well. These are all issues that I've challenged them to go and look at developing in a much more detailed way, because I'm very clear about the need to make sure that active travel is not just about those who have got a predisposition to being active, but also to reaching out to those communities that are more deprived and more difficult to get to ensure that they get the benefits that can come from this type of investment as well.
Question 5, Jamie Halcro-Johnson.
To ask the Scottish Government how Transport Scotland supports and promotes tourism.
Cabinet Secretary.
Transport Scotland works with partners. It supports tourism by investing in our transport network to promote Scotland as an accessible and attractive place to visit. For example, Transport Scotland works closely with Scotland's airports to help secure new routes that improve business connectivity and inbound tourism, such as the Edinburgh to Beijing international route operated by Hainan Airlines, introduced in 2018.
Jamie Halcro-Johnson.
Another area in which Transport Scotland has direct involvement is the use of brown tourist signs on roads. We know from Visit Scotland research that these are valued, and that Visit Scotland also says they play a role in enabling visitors to reach tourist destinations safely by car. However, a small business in my Highlands and Islands region has recently been quoted almost £50,000 by Transport Scotland to erect just 4 signs for their business. So does the Cabinet Secretary think this valued scheme is sufficiently affordable and accessible to tourism-focused businesses? And if he doesn't, what action will he take to support those businesses to whom cost is a prohibitive factor?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, there is obviously a clear criteria for the use of road signage, but if the member wants to furnish me with the specific details that he's referring to, I'm more than happy to get Transport Scotland officials to look into the matter.
Liam MacArthur.
Thank you very much. Does the Transport Secretary believe that Transport Scotland's sanctioning of the replacement of the Hamnavoe on the Stromness-Skravster route with a freighter vessel with only 12 passengers as capacity either meets the needs of tourists or indeed the local community in Orkney?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I recognise that in some of the vessels there are challenges, particularly at key points in the year when we see visitor numbers significant and increasing. We are continuing to look at how we can expand and improve on the ferry network within Scotland and also in the vessels which we've got in construction at the present time. But I do recognise that there are particular challenges on points of on the networks as a result of the increasing demand we're seeing both in terms of freight and also in passenger numbers, and will continue through the ferries plan to try to address these issues appropriately.
Question 6, Donald Cameron. Mr Cameron, you don't need to press your button when you've been pulled from the list. So, Mr Cameron.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update following the last meeting of the A83 Taskforce.
Cabinet Secretary.
I chaired a meeting of the A83 Taskforce on the 15th of November 2018. A full and frank discussion was had, and I appreciate the opportunity to listen to local concerns. At the meeting, I made a commitment that the Argyll region would be prioritised in the forthcoming Strategic Transport Projects Review too. I also announced that we will review the potential for additional physical landslide mitigation measures at the Rest and Be Thankful. I asked for Transport Scotland officials to report back to me by mid-February with the findings of the review in advance of the next task force meeting on the 27th of March 2019 to enable discussion of the findings at that meeting with local and regional stakeholders. Since 2007, we have invested some £70 million in the maintenance of this trunk road, including £11 million at the Rest and Be Thankful on the landslide mitigation measures and the local old military road diversion. These measures have worked, having already successfully stopped landslide material from reaching the road and keeping this important route opened on an estimated 50 to 60 days when it otherwise would have been closed.
Donald Cameron.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for the answer. He'll be aware that as the winter snap begins to hit the Highlands and Islands regions, routes such as the Rest and Be Thankful section of the A83 will inevitably become more treacherous. Given there's some scepticism about these mitigation measures, what assurances can he give to frustrated residents and businesses that they will be able to travel that route without fear of major delays or road closures?
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm surprised at the member's reference to scepticism because the mitigation measures which have been taken forward are the ones which were recommended by the task force, which includes local stakeholders. And that work continues to be implemented. There's some almost £4.5 million being spent on additional measures which are being put in place. But look, the history of this site is a very clear one, one where there has been significant problems as a result of landslide. The mitigation measures have had a positive impact. They have not eliminated all of the matter. However, for example, the catch pits which are continuing to be installed, again, will provide additional resilience and assurance in there, and the review work which has been undertaken at the present time by Transport Scotland and their expert advisors will inform us as to whether there are further measures we can put in place in order to mitigate against further landslide risks on this particular route as we go forward.
Question 7, Allan.
To ask the Scottish Government how many staff employed by Caledonian MacBrayne are currently resident within the Western Isles.
Cabinet Secretary.
CalMac Ferries Limited is a major employer in our island and coastal communities, employing some 242 staff who reside in Skye, Raasay, Lewis, Harris, the Uist and Barra.
Alasdair Allan.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his reply. Can he commit to examining ways in future to further encourage more staff working for both CalMac and indeed the Government's Ferries Division to be given the option in the future of living and working in the communities they serve?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, the member will be aware that CalMac already proactively undertake work in our in schools in our island communities and also careers fairs in our island communities in order to encourage people to think about apprenticeships with them and also through their cadet programme. And CalMac are always keen to try to seek to encourage local island-based applicants for jobs with them. But I'm always more than happy to encourage more of those who reside in our island communities to consider applying for these posts and to look at ways in which we can further support that and going forward. And I'll ensure that my ministerial colleague Paul Wheelhouse gives further consideration to this issue and whether there's further measures that we take, as has been suggested by the member, to try to increase the number of people who live in our island communities who are employed with CalMac.
Stuart McMillan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Cabinet Secretary confirm that, notwithstanding the valid points that my good friend and colleague Alasdair Allan has just proposed, that the HQ of CalMac will remain in Gourock, in my constituency?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, CalMac made a very firm commitment in their bid for the Clyde and Hebridean Ferry Service contract to retain their head office in Gourock, and CalMac are an integral part, I recognise, of the local community in Inverclyde, where they employ some 266 people. But I can assure the member we're keen to make sure that those communities who do have a close link to CalMac maximise the benefits from them, not only in the member's constituency, but also in his parliamentary colleagues' constituency in our island communities as well.
Question 8, James Dornan.
To ask the Scottish Government when was the last time it met with First Bus?
Cabinet Secretary.
The last meeting Scottish Government officials held with First Bus was on Monday the 14th of June of this year.
James Dornan.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. The Cabinet Secretary may be aware that a growing number of my constituents have been complaining about the quality of the bus service from the south of Glasgow into the city centre. I asked First Bus to attend a public meeting that I had arranged, only for them to refuse. Does the Cabinet Secretary not agree with me that since First Bus is receiving substantial amounts of public money, then they should be more accountable to the public and be prepared to listen to their needs?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I'm getting ahead of myself. The last meeting officials had was on the 14th of January, not in June of this year. If I can correct the record on that matter. I do regret the fact that First Bus did not agree to attend the meeting which was organised by the member, and I would certainly encourage him to continue to pursue First Bus on this issue, because it is important that they engage with local communities where they deliver services to. And I know in the member's constituency, particularly in areas such as Castlemilk, access to bus transport is extremely important in being able to access the city centre. And I would certainly wish to encourage First Bus to engage with the member and his constituents to look at addressing issues of concern which his constituents may have, and to ensure the service has been delivered in such a way that reflects the needs of the local community.
Question 9, Maureen Watt.
To ask the Scottish Government what its initial assessment is of the impact of the AWPR on North East transport.
Cabinet Secretary.
Transport Scotland will be undertaking an evaluation of the AWPR project in line with the Scottish Trunk Roads Infrastructure Project evaluation guidance against both the transport planning objectives and wider evaluation criteria. The evaluation will consider the impact of the scheme by comparing conditions year 1 and then year 3 and year 5 after opening, with forecasts made during scheme design and development.
Maureen Watt.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. He will be pleased to note that we are already seeing a significant reduction in heavy goods vehicles traffic in the Peter Cooter and Tory parts of my constituency and in Market Street in the centre of Aberdeen, which has had unacceptable pollution and emissions levels. Can the Cabinet Secretary say when these will next be measured so that we can see the environmental as well as the economic benefits of this government delivering the AWPR?
Cabinet Secretary, briefly, please.
Presiding Officer, I'm very pleased to hear that the members' constituents are already seeing the benefits of this particular scheme on the ground, and the feedback that I've received certainly reflects that. The Government's project evaluation will include consideration of the impacts of AWPR against a number of criteria, which will include economic, safety and also environmental matters. The local authority, though, has a responsibility to consider issues relating to local air quality monitoring and report periodically on the Aberdeen air quality management areas as to the levels which they have in those particular areas where monitoring has been undertaken. Therefore, air quality monitoring at a local level is a matter which will be undertaken by the local authority. But what I can assure the member is that we are continuing to work with Aberdeen City Council in looking to progress the introduction of a low emission zone by 2020 in the city, in line with their programme for government commitment, which again is about helping to improve air quality within our city centres, because we know of the potential impact that they can actually have on individuals who may have a precondition which is related to problems associated with taking in contaminated air.
Jamie Green, this must be brief.
Thank you. Can I simply ask the Cabinet Secretary to update Parliament when this delayed project will be fully open to traffic, and for the record what the total estimated cost of the project will be?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the member will welcome the fact that 85% of the road is now opened and the North East economy is now getting the benefits of that. The contractors have advised that they've completed the remedial work on the crossing over the River Don. They have still to provide assurances over the remedial work that's been undertaken and the enhanced monitoring arrangements they're putting in place for that. Once they provide that information will then be passed to Transport Scotland, which can then be considered for opening the final section of this road. But I'm sure the member will welcome the fact that the majority of this road is now open. In terms of cost, it still stands at the £745 million as the contract set out. And as member will recognise that the contractors have stated that they have made a claim, and as I've made very clear, any claim, which is not unusual for a major infrastructure project of this nature, has to be substantiated and evidence-based. And to date, the contractors have not provided that evidence to substantiate any claim. Therefore, it still stands at the present financial cost.
Thank you. I have to move on to the next section of questions. I apologise to Gail Ross for not reaching a question. Justice and the Law Office questions. Number 1, Andy Whiteman, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how many proceedings have been raised against Scottish limited partnerships for failure to comply with the Scottish Partnerships Register of People with Significant Control Regulations 2017 and how many convictions there were.
Lord Advocate.
As at last Friday, the Crown had received no reports of alleged offences under the 2017 regulations, and accordingly the Crown in Scotland has not raised any proceedings under those regulations.
Andy Whiteman.
I thank the Lord Advocate for that answer. As of 10th December 2018, according to work undertaken by investigative journalist Richard Smith, of 18,000 active SLPs, just over 2,700 had not submitted any information. As the Lord Advocate is aware, this is an offence, and in a written answer from him on 19th March 2018, he said that over the last 10 years there had been no prosecutions for failure to meet statutory provisions. He also said that the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service has recognised Companies House as a specialist reporting agency and is working with them to facilitate the reporting of alleged offences. What progress has been made with this work, and are any prosecutions anticipated as a consequence, given the offences are very evident?
Lord Advocate.
There have been a number of cases reported to the Crown since that question was asked and answered under Section 451 of the Companies Act 2006 by Companies House, and those cases are currently being considered. The Crown continues to work, and there's continuing engagement with Companies House with a view to facilitating the reporting of other alleged offences, including those under the 2017 regulations. It's a matter for Companies House as the specialist reporting agency to determine its approach to enforcement of the regulations.
Rona Mackay.
Sir, all steps to improve transparency around the SLPs are, of course, welcome. Does the Lord Advocate agree that the proposed reforms announced by the UK Government in December last year, snuck out under the cloud of Brexit chaos, still falls far short of what is necessary to close the many loopholes which exist?
Lord Advocate.
That's a question which will be more appropriate to direct to Mr Mackay. Questions of substance about the proposed reforms to the law are matters for him. I can deal with issues relating to the investigation and prosecution of alleged offences under the regulations.
Indeed, Lord Advocate. Question 2, Peter Chapman, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government when it will next publish the police strength statistics for Scotland.
Cabinet Secretary.
The next edition in the series, Police Officer Quarterly Strength Scotland, Scotland 31 December 2018, will be published on Tuesday, the 5th of February at 9:30 a.m. in line with requirements of the Code of Practice for Official Statistics. This publication date has been announced via the Scottish Government's Official Statistics forthcoming publications webpage.
Peter Chapman.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. The latest police numbers show that the number of local divisional officers in the North East has been cut by 42 officers in the last year alone. This is a clear demonstration of the SNP's policy of centralisation to the detriment of communities in my region. Can he assure me I won't discover further reductions in the next set of statistics?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, can I just on the local issue say that local policing in the North East Division has 1,158 full-time police officers as at 30 September 2018. That's an increase of 2.3% since 2013. But I have to say, Presiding Officer, the lack of self-awareness from Peter Chapman on asking this question when in the SNP's led Scottish Government we have 913 more officers than we had in 2007. That is compared to the Conservative-led UK Government, which has utterly decimated police services in England and Wales. 20,000 less officers. That's a reduction of 13%. Just to put that into numbers, in Scotland we have 32 officers per 10,000. In England and Wales, that is 21 officers per 10,000 in England and Wales. So I would just say to the member, perhaps a little bit of self-awareness is necessary when asking these questions. And perhaps as we get into burn season, he may want to be reminded of those famous verses, "Oh, would some power the gift give us to see ourselves as others see us."
Daniel Johnston.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'll resist the temptation of quoting Burns in my question. But Edinburgh Council is currently planning to cut the £2.6 million it provides the police directly, which fund 54 additional community-based officers in the capital. Does the Minister know the total number of officers that are funded directly by local authorities? And what impact does he think that the reductions in local authority spending over the last few years will have on the level of community-based officers in Scotland?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, can I say a couple of things to the member? He and I discussed this at the last or previous session of the Justice Committee. It would be for the local authority to decide how to spend its resource. I would say, and of course, he is free to argue otherwise, that of course local authorities in the upcoming budget have a very fair settlement. Indeed, now if he thinks that that is not the case, it is incumbent on his party to come forward with proposals on where, of course, we'd have to remove money from the budget to increase local government budget. Now, I understand he will, no doubt, in his party will engage in that process. But we are treating police in terms of their our investment very fairly, not just fairly, but I would say very well, with a revenue protection plus a 52% increase in their capital budget. So we'll continue to invest in the police, invest in local government. If he thinks there should be a change to that in terms of the budget, I would say to him and his colleagues to engage positively in the budget process.
Question 3, Mike Rumbles.
To ask the Scottish Government what the Lord Advocate's position is on its competency to authorise another referendum on Scottish independence without another Section 30 order.
Minister Graham Day.
Presiding Officer, by long-standing convention, the content of any legal advice received by the Government is, of course, confidential.
Mike Rumbles.
Well, what a poor response that was, Presiding Officer. In the spirit of openness, and transparency, which this Parliament prides itself on, does the Minister not agree with me? Just as Scottish ministers demanded the UK Government publish its legal advice on Brexit, and it was published, the Lord Advocate's advice on an independence referendum should indeed be published by Scottish ministers. And I see the Lord Advocate is present. It would have been helpful if perhaps the Lord Advocate had given us the benefit of his advice.
Minister.
Presiding Officer, in the spirit of your oft-repeated plea that ministers and members should avoid extending these exchanges unnecessarily, I would refer the member to my previous answer, but in so doing, point out that the convention I refer to is so long-standing, it goes, I believe, all the way back to when the Lib Dems were part of the then coalition executive. Quite some time ago, of course, which is why perhaps the existence of the convention has slipped Mr Rumble's memory.
Adam Tompkins.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Is it the Scottish Government's view that this Parliament could lawfully pass legislation authorising an independence referendum without a Section 30 order or not? Yes or no?
Minister.
Presiding Officer, I have to refer the member to my earlier answer.
Question 4, Ross Greer.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what action it is taking to improve relations between the Kurdish community and the police.
Cabinet Secretary.
Police Scotland is committed to building positive relationships with all of Scotland's communities. Responsibility for this lies with the Chief Constable. However, the Scottish Government understands that Police Scotland have engaged recently with representatives of the Kurdish community to address concerns which have been raised by some members of that community. I also understand that Police Scotland have directly engaged with the member in his capacity as co-convener of this Parliament's cross-party group on Kurdistan.
Ross Greer.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. He might be aware that police operations over recent years have resulted in a situation where members of the Kurdish community are now afraid to attend their own community centre and will no longer send their children to language and dancing classes for fear of being monitored. This is obviously an unacceptable and unsustainable situation. Would the Cabinet Secretary agree to a meeting with representatives of the Kurdish community and the cross-party group on Kurdistan to discuss how we can improve relations and trust between this community and the police?
Cabinet Secretary.
So what I would say to the members, I'm more than happy to engage with him and, of course, members of the Kurdish community. I couldn't do that on the basis of any live police investigations. You would understand that, of course, but on the wider issue and to hear their anxieties and their concerns, of course, I'd be more than happy to meet with him in his role as the co-convener of that cross-party group. What I would also say is that having engaged with Police Scotland over a number of years over concerns that I had as a member of the Muslim community, as a young Asian male growing up, having been stopped and searched on numerous occasions in my younger days for no apparent reason. I know that it's taken time for the Police Scotland to build up that level of trust back with the Muslim community. That takes hard work, that takes effort. But certainly with the Chief Constable that we have, I know he is utterly and absolutely committed to making sure that we have those positive community relations. So, of course, you can continue to engage directly with Police Scotland. Where I can assist in that, or certainly where I can listen to those concerns, I'd be more than happy to do so.
Question 5, Gil Patterson.
Many thanks, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how much Police Scotland expects to receive from the proposals in the draft budget and how it will allocate this.
Cabinet Secretary.
The Scottish Budget 1920, published on the 12th of December last year, contains funding of £1.2 billion for the Scottish Police Authority. That's a 3.7% increase on the 18-19 budget. This includes real terms protection for the revenue budget and, as I mentioned earlier, a 52% uplift in the capital budget for investment in modern ICT. But it is, of course, for the Scottish Police Authority to now set its budget for 1920, which includes setting the budget for Police Scotland.
Gil Patterson.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer? I'm sure the Cabinet Secretary will welcome the fact that the Police and Fire Service will no longer be punished by the UK Treasury, now allowing them to claim back VAT. Has the Police and Fire Service been paid back the VAT that had been withheld? And if so, how much has that been?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, members will know, of course, that we welcome the VAT policy change that came into effect in March 2018. However, this does not address the issue of VAT that had already been paid to Her Majesty's Treasury between 2013 and 2018. So having conceded the principle of saying that it is unfair to charge our service and only our service VAT, they have refused, of course, to pay back that 125 million for the Scottish Police Authority and around 50 million for the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. Now, if we could all, as a Parliament, including, and I look specifically at the Conservative benches, agree to lobby the UK Government to give back that money that they have taken unfairly from Scotland, then, of course, we can continue to invest in the police service, continue to invest in the ICT system and continue to keep investing in keeping our communities safe.
Briefly, Mr Kerr.
Very briefly, Presiding Officer, Police Scotland has been plagued by financial trouble since the SNP created it, despite the Scottish Conservatives getting back the VAT and bailing out the SNP. The Auditor was clear, Auditor General was clear last December that if the IT system isn't sorted out, the force will remain in deficit. Does the Cabinet Secretary think the Auditor General is wrong?
Cabinet Secretary.
I always listen to what the Auditor General has to say. I also, of course, happen to listen to what those south of the border are saying about UK Government's lack of investment in the police service. Just to quote the English and Wales Police Federation, they say the UK Government's austerity policies, which have seen police budgets, they don't like this at all, but I'll continue to read this quote, it is the UK Government's austerity policies which have seen police budgets slashed by 19% in real terms. That is why policing in England and Wales is in crisis, and our members are on our knees trying to keep up with the rising tide of crime with nearly 22,000 fewer officers. Compare that to Scotland, where we have revenue protection, an uplift of 52% in the capital budget, more police officers than we inherited, and lower crime rates. I think that puts us in a relatively good position in comparison to police services south of the border.
Question 6, Edward Mountain.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether HMP Inverness exceeded prisoner capacity in 2018.
Cabinet Secretary.
It did. The average population during 2018 was 113 people. That's an average occupancy level of just over 120%. HMP Inverness, as the member will no doubt know, is a small local prison that manages the requirements of the courts across a vast geographical area. The Scottish Prison Service supports positive relationships by, wherever possible, accommodating people in the prison closest to the home, which has contributed to that level of occupancy.
Edward Mountain.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for their answer. When prisons exceed capacity, one of the areas that suffers is rehabilitation and the other is safety. Can you confirm that enough resources are being directed at providing sufficient warders and rehabilitation support to prisoners in Inverness, and when the new prison in Inverness will be ready for use?
Cabinet Secretary.
Can I say that Edward Mountain raises a very important point. Indeed, none of us want to see over-occupancy in any of our prisons, and I addressed the question on this last week, I think, from Liam MacArthur. The fact that we have one of the highest, if not by some measures, the highest prison population in Western Europe is to great shame, and it's not a statistic to be proud of at all. So he's absolutely right. That does have a detrimental effect potentially on rehabilitation, and I know SPS are very aware of that, and we'll work hard to continue to fund rehabilitation programmes and also look at alternatives to custody. And what I would say genuinely to the member, and I know his UK government colleagues recognise this, that short sentences do not have the impact on rehabilitating those who commit crimes, and certainly we are better looking at community disposals that are better at rehabilitating those offenders. So when we come forward with plans to introduce a presumption against short sentences of 12 months, I would appreciate him and his party looking at that with genuine open-mindedness. And in terms of the replacement for HMP in Inverness, I will send them some of the details on that. Is within our infrastructure planning in the government, but it would be fair to say that the priority at the moment is the female custodial estate, then a replacement for Barlinnie, and then a replacement for HMP in Inverness.
Question 7, Claudia Beamish.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask Scottish Government how its policy on dealing with hate crimes is informed by the expertise of women's organisations.
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank the member for the question. There is a clear need for action to be taken to tackle gender-based prejudice and misogyny. We're currently seeking views on how best to tackle this in Scotland as part of our consultation on hate crime legislation. As we work to develop the proposals within our consultation, we engage with a number of women's organisations, including but not exclusive to Engender, Rape Crisis Scotland, Zero Tolerance and Scottish Women's Aid. The consultation was launched, as the member no doubt knows, on the 14th of November. It will run until the 24th of February this year. It provides a range of organisations and groups, as well as members of the public, with an opportunity to share their views and inform what is included in the new hate crime legislation. I would encourage everybody with an interest to provide a response.
Claudia Beamish.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer and certainly welcome the consultation. And I wonder if the Cabinet Secretary can give detail of how his government is engaging with women's groups, especially in rural parts of the country where women might be quite isolated and not necessarily members of a particular grouping. Thank you.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think it's a hugely important point. As part of the hate crime consultation, we're holding a host of events right across the country, including in some remote and rural areas. I'll be meeting alongside the Minister for Equalities and Gender, along with a number of other organisations, women's organisations, in March of this year. I will certainly speak to them if they feel there is a deficiency in terms of the engagement with women in remote and rural areas. I'd be more than happy to see how we can address that deficiency if it exists. But she's absolutely right on the premise of her question that there are undoubtedly specific issues that affect women in rural and remote areas. So anything more we can do on that, and I can do as the Cabinet Secretary, certainly I will look to do.
Question 8, Mark MacDonald.
To ask the Scottish Government what steps are in place to prevent disclosure of an accused's identity from compromising the safety of innocent parties.
Cabinet Secretary.
In addition to the provisions of the Contempt of Court Act 1981, the courts have a common law power to restrict the reporting of proceedings where it is in the interest of justice to do so. It is for the court to decide whether to make such an order in an individual case. In appropriate cases, an interdict may also be available.
Mark MacDonald.
The Cabinet Secretary be aware that I wrote to himself, the Lord Advocate and Solicitor General, about a case in my constituency where a young victim could potentially have been identified inadvertently as a result of the accused's identity being disclosed. I'm grateful for the support that was provided to prevent that from happening. But there are other cases where this occurs. For example, in cases where the individual's identity and address being disclosed opens up the potential for innocent family members to face potential retribution and repercussion as a result of their actions, despite the fact those individuals themselves are innocent. Will the Cabinet Secretary look at the issues around identification, in particular disclosure of address details, which can often lead to repercussions and retribution being brought to the door of family members who have played no role in any criminal proceedings?
Cabinet Secretary, briefly, please.
It's an important issue that Mark MacDonald raises. I will look at that. I do, once again, say that it is, of course, for the courts to make that decision when it comes to particular orders, imposing orders banning publications of matters mentioned in court. But on the wider issue, he is not the only MSP that has written to me about a similar case to this, and there are, of course, protections in place, but if we can strengthen them, I would look to my colleagues, such as Lord Advocate and others, if we can look at seeing what else can be done. Of course, we will keep an open mind to that, with whatever is in the power of the government. But I reiterate, much of this is in the power of the courts, and rightly so.
Thank you very much. That concludes portfolio questions. Can I, just let me finish and I'll take you. And can I apologise to Liam Kerr and Joan McAlpine for failing to reach them? Mr Rumbles.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I rise to make a point of order. It's focused on the role under the Scotland Act of the law officers, the Lord Advocate present with us today, and the Solicitor General. Now, the law officers are privileged to be the only two unelected people allowed to sit in this chamber. This was written into the Scotland Act so that they are here specifically to give their opinions and views directly to MSPs. Now, in my question, I asked what the Lord Advocate's position is on the Scottish Government's competency to authorise another referendum on Scottish independence without another Section 30 order. I didn't ask what his advice was to the Scottish Government. I specifically asked for his advice to MSPs here in this chamber. As I say, under the Scotland Act, they are here for that purpose. And what I find particularly annoying is that the Lord Advocate is actually present and has not taken the decision to answer my question. Is it appropriate, I'd like to know from the Chair, is it appropriate for the Lord Advocate to sit in this Parliament in the privileged position he is under the Scotland Act and not address MSPs directly, as was the purpose of the Scotland Act in the first place?
Thank you very much, Mr Rumbles. And point of order, and thank you for making it. However, as set out in Rule 13.7 of the Standing Orders, with a few exceptions that don't apply in this instance, oral questions may be answered by any member of the Scottish Government or a junior Scottish minister. As the member is aware, oral questions are addressed to the Scottish Government, as your one was, and it is for the Scottish Government to decide who attends to answer each question. Sorry, you don't have a microphone. You have now.
I understand all of that, and I accept entirely the position that you've just outlined. However, my question goes further than my question today. I understand that the Scottish Government can choose under standing orders to do this. My question is more a fundamental point and very important for the Parliament. Why is the Lord Advocate under the Scotland Act here in his privileged position and yet has chosen not to answer the questions directly that he is here for under the Scotland Act?
I'm afraid I did answer your point of order. The point of order was answered clearly. That's in the standing orders. That's the position, Mr Rumbles. You may be dissatisfied, but that's the rules of the Parliament. I have to now move on to the next item of business, which is a statement, and I'll give the front bench a moment to take up their places. Thank you. I take it, Cabinet Secretary, you're ready. The next item of business is a statement by John Swinney on a review of personal and social education. The Cabinet Secretary will take questions at the end of his statement, and so there should be no interventions or interruptions. And I call on John Swinney to make his statement. Cabinet Secretary, please. You don't have your microphone, Mr Swinney.
My apologies, Presiding Officer. The health and well-being of children and young people in our schools is central to our ambition to achieve excellence and equity for all in a high-performing education system. Personal and social education, or PSE, is a key element of this approach and must be firmly aligned to curriculum for excellence. Children and young people must be equipped with the skills and knowledge they need to make their own decisions. Equity for all can only be achieved through an inclusive education system. Scotland's inclusive approach celebrates diversity and allows all children and young people to develop an understanding and recognition of difference. This contributes to the development of an increasingly inclusive, compassionate and equal society. This is a core principle of personal and social education to provide young people with the requisite knowledge, skills and resilience to fulfil their potential. I am very pleased to announce that the review of personal and social education has been completed and I have accepted all of the recommendations of the review. I believe the recommendations will strengthen the delivery of personal and social education in our schools and will support our young people to reach their full potential. The recommendations will further embed our ambitions for prevention and early intervention in our schools to provide every young person with the opportunity to grow, to achieve and to succeed as individuals. Before I speak about the details of the review, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the Education and Skills Committee for investigating the main issues in relation to the content and delivery of PSE. The committee's report, Let's Talk About Personal and Social Education, helped to establish the focus of the review. I'm also grateful to Christina McKelvey MSP for her role during her time as convener of the Parliament's Equalities and Human Rights Committee, and for their report, It's Not Cool to Be Cruel, Prejudice-Based Bullying and Harassment of Children and Young People in Schools, which also highlighted the importance of high-quality personal and social education. I would further like to take the opportunity to thank everyone who has contributed to the review, especially the young people whose insightful contributions played a huge part in this review. Their time and contributions were extremely valuable in shaping the final report and recommendations. Personal and social education is a key component of Curriculum for Excellence. It should support children and young people to gain the knowledge, skills and attributes needed for life in the 21st century, including skills for learning, life and work. Good and relevant personal and social education is a major factor in providing the foundations of successful learning and in supporting schools to close the attainment gap. Personal and social education should be designed to enable children and young people to develop, to learn about their rights and responsibilities, to help them stay healthy, safe and prepare them for the challenges and opportunities that they will experience. The review includes 16 recommendations outlining how we can, in cooperation with our partners, improve the delivery of personal and social education to provide all young people with the learning experience that they need and want. The recommendations have been informed by a 20-month review process which involved reviewing existing resources, a thematic inspection of PSE delivery in 55 schools and early learning centres, and an extensive 6-month engagement programme with COSLA, local authority representatives, third sector organisations, faith groups and young people. The thematic inspection undertaken by Education Scotland was a significant element in the review process, and I am grateful to the inspection team for completing the inspection in a short period of time. The thematic inspection highlighted key strengths of PSE delivery as well as areas for improvement, both of which were crucial elements of a thorough and extensive engagement with a range of stakeholders, providing the basis for the suite of recommendations that will strengthen PSE delivery and prepare children and young people for learning, work and for life. The priority and place of PSE in the curriculum and the role of school senior team in promoting PSE's importance in our schools is crucial. I am therefore pleased to announce that the Government and our key partners will co-produce a new PSE toolkit to enhance PSE delivery at all stages of education. It will illustrate models of good practice, provide support and resource for teachers on delivery of PSE, and provide models for involving children and young people in the design and the delivery of personal and social education. It is vital that PSE provides children and young people with the right learning at the right stage and in an appropriate manner. The Scottish Government and Education Scotland will produce advice and guidance on approaches to monitoring young people's progression in PSE to support schools in providing learning that equips our young people with the knowledge, skills and resilience that they need. To provide support to teachers and pupils in mental well-being, new guidance on the spectrum of mental health and well-being services available will be produced. This will complement the work we are taking forward to provide access to school counsellors and enable schools to complement existing provision with additional services and share effective practice already delivering improvements in our schools. Throughout the review, the issue of consent and how it is taught was raised. This is an important aspect of personal and social education. Our young people are facing a number of influences on what is appropriate and inappropriate, especially from online resources. As I announced in November, we will update the existing statutory guidance available to schools on relationships, sexual health and parenthood to ensure that consent education is stage and age appropriate, that it focuses on the issues relevant to young people, provides support and resource to our teachers on issues such as sexual harassment and online influences, linking with the work that we are taking forward to deliver LGBT inclusive education within our schools. The senior phase of schools is a critical time as we prepare our young people for life after school. Young people themselves told us through targeted engagement that PSE was not meeting their needs and preparing them with the necessary life skills and knowledge. This is vital so that the pioneers and leaders of tomorrow are equipped and ready for the challenges ahead. We will therefore establish a senior phase PSE mentoring programme to enable pupils to design and deliver PSE learning that is relevant to them and enables focus on the issues and knowledge required for the next phase in life. We will also provide support to teachers through the PSE toolkit on where they can access support for pupils preparing for life after school. As well as preparing our children and young people, it is critical that we provide the right level of support and resource for our teachers to ensure the consistent delivery of PSE in all of our schools. We will therefore develop a suite of learning resources that promote a focus on the key issues identified by young people during the review process: life skills, personal development, planning for choices and change, relationships, sexual health and parenthood. Key partners in career-long professional learning, as well as the third sector, will be instrumental in helping us to deliver this recommendation. I am also acutely aware through the review process of some of the high caseloads that pastoral and guidance teachers are currently having to deal with, which is having an effect on the support being offered to our young people. I want to improve this situation and to allow teachers to deliver the support and help to young people that they want. The PSE toolkit will deliver this ambition by providing our hugely important pastoral and guidance staff with additional resource, a reduction in the bureaucracy that they face, and provide details on evaluated good practice models. Additionally, I believe that our working with our local government partners and the teaching unions will enable us to take steps to highlight the vital and rewarding role of pastoral and guidance teachers as a career pathway. It is not just the existing teaching profession that we need to equip with the necessary skills and resource, but the teachers of tomorrow. And that is why we will work with the General Teaching Council to update the standards for professional registration to ensure that the importance of PSE is recognised as a skill expected of all newly qualified teachers. There is a great deal of strength, Presiding Officer, in our education system, and I am determined to ensure that the delivery of personal and social education is making a difference to the lives of children and young people in Scotland. For me, and I am sure for all members here today, I want a Scotland where children and young people form healthy relationships and value diversity, where everyone should be recognised and respected for who they are individually, where our children and young people can grow up in a safe environment in which their rights and needs are respected and protected, where every child and young person is supported to be who they want to be treated equally, to enjoy equal chances and choices in all aspects of their lives, and where every child and young person is valued for the contribution they make to our society and communities. As one of the young people quoted in our online survey said, PSE is really good for learning about everything you might encounter in life. It's very empowering, and PSE is a very good and vital subject. This is the experience we want for all of our children and young people, to give them the skills and the knowledge to prepare them for learning, work and life. The range of actions to strengthen the delivery of personal and social education that I have announced today reaffirm our commitment to making that a reality for all children and young people, which will make a real difference to their lives in Scotland.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. The Cabinet Secretary will now take questions on the issues raised. We have about 20 minutes for questions. Can I ask those members who want to ask questions, press the request to speak buttons now. Excuse me, and I call Liz Smith to be followed by Ian Gray. Ms Smith, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Cabinet Secretary, yesterday on several news channels we heard about the very disturbing circumstances which had led to the death of teenager Molly Russell. Her father, in what was a very brave interview, spoke very emotionally about how social media has the potential to damage a young person's life, irrespective of the quality of the guidance provided at home or in school. So in the context, Cabinet Secretary, of your comments about working with a wide range of stakeholders, may I ask what engagement the Scottish Government has had with the social media industry to complement the work that is being done at UK level to ensure that online safety is a very central part of PSE in the toolkit that you have described?
Cabinet Secretary.
The Scottish Government has discussions with a range of interested parties about the issues around social media, and what I think is important is that we focus and the work that we do in personal and social education to equip young people with the resilience and the capacity to make judgments around the handling of social media and the use of social media to ensure that they are suitably equipped and protected to deal with some of the potential challenges that can come with social media. Personal social education is also an implicit part of the ethos of education, and I want to make sure that the very good practice that I see that goes on in schools to encourage the nurturing of good relationships is not only deployed in a context of school activity, but is also enables young people to think about their own contribution to the world of social media and the impact that some of their actions can have on social media if it is not appropriately set. So the actions that we take here are designed to ensure that in an ever-changing world, and a world that's changing at a much faster pace than any of us have ever seen it changing before, young people are equipped with the essential attributes of resilience to enable them to manage those challenges. Now, some of that will come from personal and social education. Some of that will come from the wider impact of Curriculum for Excellence, which is focused on entirely that objective of ensuring young people are equipped for modern life and supported in being able to meet some of the challenges, some of which may present themselves through social media.
Ian Gray, followed by Ruth Maguire.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thank you to the Cabinet Secretary for early sight of his statement. We agree with the Cabinet Secretary that schools are very much about the health and well-being of our young people, their values and social development, and progress indeed towards inclusivity and equality in wider society. So the review is important and the acceptance of its recommendations welcome. However, it is now almost 2 years since the Education Committee report, which Mr Swinney says provided the focus for this review, and another 2 years before he expects delivery. So can I ask, when does he expect to bring his implementation plan back to Parliament? And when does he expect the updated statutory guidance on relationships and sexual health to be completed? Mr Swinney also acknowledged the pressure on guidance teachers, which he says will be addressed by a PSE toolkit. Does he not agree it would be better addressed by more teachers generally and more guidance teachers specifically, and how will he try and deliver that?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the first point is that I'm signalling to Parliament the considered way in which the Government has addressed this important issue. And I think it is important that we take time to put in place the right measures that should be implemented. And we now move to the implementation phase, and that will take place over the course of the next 2 years to ensure that on a staged basis we make the necessary progress that's required. The revised guidance on relationships, sexual health and parenthood I expect to be launched at the Scottish Learning Festival in September of this year. It has currently been piloted in 40 schools around the country. We want to ensure that that is effectively piloted so that it can then be adapted to make sure that it can be implemented widely within our education system. But if we can do that in a shorter timescale, then we will do that. But I want to make sure the material that we put in place meets the needs of the teaching profession and the needs of young children and young people. In relation to the PSE toolkit is designed to be a helpful addition to the resources that are available to guidance teachers, which will assist them in identifying best practice and deploying best practice to the best of their ability. I would say to Mr Gray on his general point about the number of teachers, the number of teachers is of course rising, Mr Gray knows that. It's been rising for the last number of years and is at the highest level it's been at since 2010. So we're making progress on increasing the number of teachers, and obviously the steps and the investment the Government has made is helping that process.
Could I have short questions, please? Ruth Maguire, followed by Oliver Mundell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Cabinet Secretary outline how this year's programme for government commitment to invest in school counselling services will assist in the delivery of PSE?
Cabinet Secretary.
As Ruth Maguire will know, the Government set out in the Programme for Government the commitments that we are making in relation to the rollout of counsellors in schools. The first part of that work will be deployed as part of the implementation of the Programme for Government, putting in place counsellors in secondary schools. The dialogue is underway with local authorities about the most appropriate means of undertaking that, and of course that will supplement the resources that are available within schools to provide the support that young people require. This morning I visited Queen Anne High School in Fife in Dunfermline and saw at first hand the very integrated and focused support that the school has put in place to provide assistance to young people. That draws together a range of expertise from a number of different disciplines, but fundamentally it is child-focused and child-centred, and obviously the addition of the mental health counsellors will support that process and enable a broader range of skills to be available to be deployed to support young people in our schools.
Could I respectfully ask for shorter answers to try and get everybody in? Oliver Mundell, followed by Gail Ross. Thank
you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Cabinet Secretary what involvement parents and carers have had to date in the development of the toolkit, and what consultation and support will be given to help them reinforce those messages at home.
Cabinet Secretary.
We obviously, as part of all of our work, engage widely within Scotland. That is what takes time, and we've engaged with parental representatives as part of this process. I think it's very important as we take the next steps that we take care, particularly in relation to some of the issues on relationships, that we engage parents actively in that process so that parents are comfortable with the approach that has been taken, and that can be supported by some of the wise guidance that's offered within the home. So, as Mr Mundell will know, we attach the greatest of significance to parental engagement, and my view is that needs to be to the fore in taking forward the next stages of this work.
Gail Ross, followed by Mary Fee.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Following the incredible commitment and success of the TIE campaign, can I ask the Scottish Government how the principles of the campaign and the inclusion of LGBT rights and issues will be delivered through the PSE reforms?
Cabinet Secretary.
As I've announced to Parliament already, as I did before Christmas, we are embarking on the taking forward of inclusive education. That message lies at the heart of the statement I've given to Parliament today, and lies at the heart of the thinking and the ethos behind personal and social education. So we will ensure in the implementation of inclusive education that is taken forward, that it is done right at the heart of personal and social education, and that the commitments that we have made in Parliament to the aspirations of the TIE campaign, which I expressed in my earlier ministerial statement, are reflected in practice in our schools.
Mary Fee, followed by Ross Greer.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the announcement of guidance on mental health and wellbeing services to complement the previous announcement regarding counsellors in schools. Can the Cabinet Secretary tell the Chamber when the first new mental health counsellor will be in a school, and if the implementation of new counsellors will be targeted in certain areas or certain schools?
Cabinet Secretary.
We're working with individual local authorities to take forward this activity. I would expect the first of the mental health counsellors to be in schools during the forthcoming financial year. Obviously, provision has been made for that within the budget provision. And obviously, some local authorities and individual schools have different approaches to the provision of mental health support, so we will work in a complementary fashion with existing provision. But I would expect that rollout to commence during 2019-20.
Ross Greer, followed by Tavish Scott.
Thank you. Can I thank the Government for the actions committed to today? The inquiry that led to this report was the first thing that I asked for after being elected to this Parliament. Given that the campaign to fix personal and social education has at all points been led by young people, can I ask that the PSE Delivery and Implementation Group includes young people? And for that, I would recommend members of the Scottish Youth Parliament as appropriate representatives. And can I ask the Government to confirm that workplace rights and associated skills are included in the life skills considered essential as part of PSE, and as such will be reflected in the updated resources and guidance?
That's two. I like the first one, okay. Thank you, Cabinet Secretary.
Well, on the substantive point that Mr Greer makes, it is essential that we hear the voices of young people in all aspects of the work that we take forward in the development of education policy. So at all stages I want to hear the views and the voices of young people as part of this process. So that will be the case in the group that we establish to take forward this activity. In relation to his second point on workplace rights, it is important that PSE remains relevant to the changing times in which we live. So it must equip young people with an understanding and a knowledge of the surrounding circumstances that they will face. Indeed, again at Queen Anne High School, where I visited this morning, guidance services are provided alongside work by Skills Development Scotland, recognising the proximity to the developing Scotland's young workforce agenda. So I think these issues will be adequately covered by the approach we take.
Tavi Scott, followed by Fulton McGregor.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To improve personal and social education across Scotland, I hope the Cabinet Secretary would recognise the importance of a range of skills, qualifications and attributes in school guidance teams, and to that extent, would he understand the case that is made to have youth workers and people with youth work qualifications included in those guidance teams to achieve the very essential reforms that are so necessary?
Cabinet Secretary.
I agree entirely with that. I think it's very interesting to look at the achievements that are made by youth workers in reaching young people who may be difficult to reach through what we might know as to be traditional educational structures, but nonetheless reach those young people and enable them to continue their participation. So I think the broadest range of skills will be relevant to help us in this work, and there is, in my view, a very strong and significant role to be played by youth workers as part of that exercise.
Fulton McGregor, followed by Annie Wells.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Cabinet Secretary further outline how the welcome announcement of the new PSE toolkit will help reduce the workload and bureaucracy that have been a concern for teachers while delivering personal and social education?
Cabinet Secretary.
Part of the approach that I've been taking has been to encourage more collaboration within the education system, whereby some of the elements of good practice, which undoubtedly exist in different parts of Scotland, are shared more widely, so that individual practitioners are not having to develop materials and resources from scratch, but that we support good models of teaching delivery around the country. That is exactly what the PSE toolkit will do, and it will help those involved in the delivery of personal and social education by providing a very rich set of resources that will assist practitioners in taking forward this work. So I think as part of the general approach that we take to try to reduce the workload of the teaching profession by encouraging collaboration and other measures, the steps we're taking in the PSE toolkit will help in that respect.
And Annie Wells, followed by Claire Adamson.
I note the Scottish Government's commitment to work with the General Teaching Council for Scotland to update the standards for professional registration. Can I ask the Scottish Government when will we see this in place? And is it the Scottish Government's opinion that additional teacher training should be introduced in relation to the reviewed PSE?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, what I would say to Annie Wells is that initial teacher education has got to take due account of the steps that we're taking in relation to PSE, and indeed so that's one element of the process. The other element of the process is the emphasis on continual professional learning, because there is a need, particularly in a theme such as personal and social education, where we're trying to maintain its relevance to the world that young people are facing. There will be a constant need for continuous professional development amongst practitioners to be undertaken. So that combination of ensuring that PSE is central to the approach to initial teacher education and that it's also recognised in continuous professional learning, I think will give us a good foundation for our dialogue with the General Teaching Council on ensuring that professional updates take into account these very important topics.
Claire Adamson, followed by Joanne Lamont.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Cabinet Secretary, we know that personal social education is an important factor in encouraging positive behaviour and healthy relationships in young people. Can the Cabinet Secretary expand on how the reviewed guidelines on consent education will be rolled into the PS curriculum and how quickly that might happen?
Cabinet Secretary.
The material in that respect is currently being piloted, and it's been piloted across 40 schools in Scotland, We're going to look at the experience of piloting those resources to make sure that we can guarantee that they are appropriate for use, because we have to take into account one of the points that I made to Oliver Mundell, the issue of parental understanding of the steps that we are taking, and to make sure that the rollout of education about consent is age and stage appropriate for individual children and young people. The importance of all of this cannot be overstated, because we have to make sure that young people are given the most substantive and thoughtful support in enabling them to come to the right judgments about consent, about the formation of relationships, because these are issues of enormous significance and concern in our society today, and we must make sure that we get these approaches correct before we roll them out across the whole of the education system.
Thank you. Two brief questions. Joanne Lamont, followed by Emma Harper. Ms Lamont.
Thank you. Given the often very sensitive issues being considered, PSE classes, in my experience, were run in small groups, not in full classes. What action is the Cabinet Secretary taking to ensure that there is not only agreement on the approach to PSE, but also on how it is delivered, and how will he ensure there is sufficient resource available to make personal and social education meaningful for all young people?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think obviously there'll be a significant amount of professional judgment to be deployed in addressing the serious point that Joanne Lamont makes about the environment and the circumstances in which personal and social education can be successfully delivered. That is a judgment that I think is best left to individual professionals. What the government is trying to do is to make sure that we work with partners to equip those practitioners with the range of materials and approaches that will support them in those efforts. And the announcements that I've made today, I hope will help to structure that approach for individual practitioners to make those judgments in individual schools around the country.
Last question, Emma Harper.
Thank you. To ask the Cabinet Secretary whether education on organ and tissue donation will be included in the curriculum for personal and social education, and if so, what resources will be made available, or appropriate designated education providers will be available. Cabinet Secretary.
Emma Harper asks me a question of a very specific nature about the content of the teaching materials. I will have to come back to her specifically on that point, but fundamentally, individual teachers will make a judgment about the particular topics and themes within the framework that we put forward, and obviously judgments will be made as to what individual topics are covered to illustrate these important questions.
Thank you, and I thank members for the succinct questions. That concludes the questions, and we have a slight pause before we move on to the next item of business.
The next item of business is a statement by Jean Freeman on clinical waste services. The Cabinet Secretary will take questions at the end of her statement, so there should be no interventions or interruptions. And I call on Jean Freeman for 10 minutes, please, Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm grateful for this opportunity to update members on the current situation on clinical waste services for the NHS in Scotland, and to set out the action the Scottish Government has taken to support both NHS Scotland and those staff who lost their jobs following Healthcare Environmental Services Limited ceasing its business operations in December of last year. As members are aware, there has been considerable interest in both Scotland and England in recent weeks on clinical waste services to the health service, and in particular on Healthcare Environmental Services Limited, a company based in Shotts, who until recently operated contracts with NHS boards and NHS trusts across the country. Clinical waste is a niche sector which requires specialist equipment, facilities and staff to manage the whole process from collection through transportation and storage and on to final disposal and incineration. Since 2009, Healthcare Environmental Services have provided those services to our NHS. However, following concerns raised by NHS England around significant backlogs of waste being stored and enforcement notices placed on HES sites in England, we understood that there was a possibility of a potential disruption to services in Scotland. In August 2018, officials from the Department of Health and Social Care in England contacted the Scottish Government, raising concerns of the amount of clinical waste collected from NHS England sites and being stored at Healthcare Environmental Services at sites in England. The volume of waste stored and being reported by the Environment Agency were in the region of 7,800 tonnes, some of which breached storage conditions and/or exceeded maximum storage times. In October, 15 NHS trusts in England terminated contracts with HES, with more reporting missed or late collections. At that time, HES sites in Scotland were not in breach of any environmental permits, licences or storage limits. However, on the 12th of September last year, SEPA, as part of routine monitoring and inspection activities, issued 2 enforcement notices to HES related to the tracking and management of waste, with 2 further enforcement notices issued on the 11th of December relating to the storage of waste. The Scottish Government, NHS Scotland and SEPA were closely monitoring the situation and were in close contact with authorities in England. Given the serious nature of the emerging situation, the Scottish Government directed NSS to ensure a national contingency plan building on local board arrangements would be ready for use in the event of any disruption to NHS waste collection services in Scotland. NSS were in contact with the company HES during this period to ensure that HES were able to deliver their contractual obligations. The company repeatedly provided assurance that it could meet those contract obligations. But on the 7th of December, HES advised NHS boards in Scotland that it was, and I quote, unable to continue to provide clinical waste services with immediate effect. As required in the contract terms and conditions, HES was given up to 20 days to resume normal service, but the company failed to do so, and the company gave notice it had ceased trading from the 27th of December. Let me be clear, it was the company who breached its contracts with 18 NHS boards, leaving Scotland's A&E departments, our hospitals, our community health centres, GP practices, dentists, without essential clinical waste services. But with the planning work already in place, full contingency arrangements were operationalised across NHS Scotland to ensure that boards, GPs, dentists and others received the service. These contingency arrangements continue and involve a range of companies in Scotland and across the UK working with NHS Scotland staff. National Services Scotland and NHS boards are closely monitoring local and national arrangements and have acted quickly to resolve any emerging issues. The contingency arrangements are also subject to robust checks by SEPA and the Department of Transport to ensure that all regulatory requirements are met. Throughout, our priority has been to ensure measures are in place so that NHS Scotland can continue to receive clinical waste services and that public safety is assured. There have been no reports that patient care has been affected or public safety compromised, and we are working to ensure that this remains the case. My thanks go to those staff working to support these arrangements. Presiding Officer, contingency measures and ultimately maintaining NHS services come at a cost. The Scottish Government has provided £1.4 million towards initial contingency planning, and NSS is leading on managing contingency arrangements on behalf of health boards. Under the terms and conditions of contract, health boards are entitled to reclaim costs incurred from HES, and they will seek to do so. The new process for a new national contract for all NHS clinical waste management services in Scotland started in 2017, with tenders invited in 2018. The process is nearing completion, and final contract details and an implementation plan are being agreed with Tradibe Healthcare Limited and should be concluded by the end of this month. The new contract is effective from the 1st of April this year for a period of up to 10 years and with a value estimated at 100 million. My apologies, Presiding Officer, I believe that should be 10 million. Introducing a single national contract covering all health boards will further improve how NHS waste is managed and offers a range of community, educational and employment benefits. A new single national contract will bring various benefits to NHS boards and communities over the next 10 years, and we are in a good position going forward. There are, however, still significant issues yet to be resolved outside of ensuring NHS provision, but relating directly to health environmental services, including supporting former employees, work that is being led by the Minister for Business, Fair Work and Skills, and maintaining environmental standards at HES sites in Shotts and Dundee, work led by the Cabinet Secretary for the Environment, Climate Change and Land Reform, with support from SEPA. I know that across this chamber, our thoughts are with the employees who lost their jobs at Christmas. This is, without question, a very difficult time for them and their families. The Scottish Government has provided and promotes a range of support, including finding alternative employment and accessing redundancy payments, including offering workforce support to HES for its employees in November last year, which was not accepted until the 27th of December, and support to over 125 employees at an event arranged at the Salvation Army Centre in Shotts on the 3rd and 4th of January and in Dundee on the 10th of January. Feedback from that event suggested that a number of employees have already managed to secure new work, and members I know will be pleased to know that of the 262 staff across Scotland and England entitled to redundancy payments, 244 have now received payments they are entitled to from the Redundancy Payment Service. RPS will then try and reclaim these costs from the company. Former employees who have set up an action group called At Help Healthcare had a constructive meeting last week with the Minister for Business to discuss a range of issues. The group has written directly to its former employers, asking them to do the right thing and pay staff wages that were owed for December. The Minister for Business also wrote to the Managing Director seeking agreement to approach the company's bankers on the same issue, but this has been refused. In terms of environmental issues, as is already stated, HES was subject to 4 environmental enforcement actions in Scotland and several more in England. It is essential, therefore, that SEPA continue to monitor sites in Shotts and Dundee to ensure there is no risk to the public. SEPA is also continuing to seek regulatory compliance from HES to ensure that the sites are cleared safely and all waste disposed of appropriately should this become necessary. There is at present no significant environmental risk and no risk to the well-being of local communities. Presiding Officer, in closing, I want to say that Scotland's health services were placed at risk as a result of HES breaching its contract. Contingency arrangements developed in anticipation of just such an eventuality, developed in consultation with NSS, SEPA and a range of other partners, ensured that there was no disruption to frontline services. The Scottish Government will continue to support former employees to access the monies they are owed and the benefits to which they may be entitled, but this relies heavily on the cooperation of the company's directors. SEPA will continue to monitor the Shotts and Dundee sites to safeguard the public and local communities and will take enforcement action should this be required. Finally, let me reiterate my thanks to those involved in ensuring the collections of clinical waste from NHS sites across Scotland continue and frontline patient services remain interrupted, and my thanks and best wishes to former employees of HES who are being supported at this difficult time for them and their families. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Can I say I know you will understand how important it is that the Chamber get the right figure in relation to the new contract that you mentioned. I wonder if you would like to confirm that figure for the Chamber, please, before we go any further.
Yes, and my apologies, Presiding Officer. It's a typing mistake and one that in my proofreading I didn't spot. It should be 10 million.
Thank you very much. I presume that's now clear for everyone. Thank you. And the Cabinet Secretary will now take questions on the issues raised in her statement. I'll allow around 20 minutes for that, and then we'll move on to the next item of business. It would be helpful if members who wish to ask a question could please press the request to speak buttons now, and I call Miles Briggs.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'd like to start by thanking the Cabinet Secretary for advance sight of her statement this afternoon. There are, however, many unanswered questions the SNP must answer today. And firstly, I'd like to ask what steps have been taken to protect and train NHS staff who are currently being tasked with handling hazardous clinical waste in our hospitals, something which is not mentioned in this statement this afternoon. Secondly, under the proposals which have been outlined today by the Cabinet Secretary, can she now confirm that all Scottish clinical waste will now need to be transported to England for incineration? What additional costs will this have for Scottish taxpayers? The Cabinet Secretary has outlined £10 million today. Given that what we've seen, it might be closer to £100 million by the time this fiasco is cleared up. And finally, can the Cabinet Secretary confirm that all hazardous clinical waste is now being transported in vehicles designed to actually transport clinical waste, and that all are displaying hazardous load signage?
Jean Freeman.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I thank Mr Briggs for his question. Let me start by saying if there is a fiasco here at all, it is not one of this government's making. And indeed, the fact that those services have continued is thanks to the anticipatory measures of having a contingency plan. Any break in services was caused by a private sector company failing to honour its contract. And it really is important that we understand that and not something that this government caused or created. In terms of protecting NHS staff and training NHS staff, of course, NHS staff have always had an involvement in the collection and getting ready for onward collection of clinical waste, and that continues. And where additional measures have been asked of them, then the boards have risk assessed those, will have discussed those through the partnership forum that exists in our boards, which is where discussions take place with staff and with trade unions, and where, as for example, in the case in Inverness, where porters were injured as a consequence of their involvement in this, the board in Highland looked at that matter very quickly indeed, undertook measures to ensure that it could not happen again, and indeed employed an additional member of staff to assist in that work. In terms of transportation for incineration, yes, the transportation is for incineration south of the border, as was the case prior to the contract being broken by HES, with the exception of, in the latter stages of their contract, the sites that they had for incineration in Shotts. And obviously, since they have ceased trading, those facilities are not available currently in the interim arrangements. And yes, all the transportation has to meet the regulatory requirements of both SEPA and the Transport Department to ensure that they meet the standards that are required. And so NSS is responsible for ensuring that that is the case, and they are meeting those requirements at this point.
Monica Lennon.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her statement. When the UK Government convened a COBRA meeting, I think we all feared that this clinical waste scandal could affect our NHS in Scotland, the workforce of Healthcare and Environmental Services Limited, and indeed our communities. Devastatingly, those workers who kept our NHS operating were dumped by their bosses at Christmas without any pay or notice. The contingency planning hasn't benefited those workers. NHS boards had continued to put money into HES's bank account, but rather than pay staff what they were owed in wages, people have been left to rely on food banks. So what exactly did the government, or when did the government know this company was in serious trouble, and what preemptive steps did it take to protect the workforce? What is the cost of contingency plans to health boards? And when were boards advised to stop paying HES Limited? And given that NHS still retains a duty of care for the stockpiled waste, what negotiations are taking place with HES Limited and other relevant parties over the future of the sites at Shotts and Dundee?
Jane Freeman.
So there were, I'm grateful to Ms Lennon for those questions. There were a number of them. I hope I've got them all, but please let me know if I haven't. In terms of, I'm going to repeat this. We are in this situation because a private sector company breached its contract. In terms of NHS continuing to put money into the bank account of HES, NHS Scotland paid the money that was owed for the services that were delivered up to the point when HES ended and breached its contract. That is perfectly right. So you have a bill, you are due to pay the bill, you pay the bill. In terms of the future of the sites at Dundee and Shotts, this is a very difficult situation in terms of being able to have discussions and negotiations with the company, because the company has ceased trading but has not put itself into insolvency. That is part of the real difficulty that the employees face. And they are owed those December wages. And as I said in my statement, my colleague Mr Hepburn has attempted to intervene and ensure that they are paid those wages, but we need the company's permission to speak to the bank, their own bank, and that has been refused. The government has acted and indeed offered pay support, I think, as I said in my statement, from November last year to the company. It wasn't accepted until the 27th of December. We can't just walk into a site in that way. We don't, and nor should we, have those direct powers. So these matters are the matters that get resolved by cooperation and discussion. And if the other party won't cooperate and discuss, then you're a bit stuck. So in terms of NHS Scotland and the continued safe removal and disposal of clinical waste, I think I have outlined that we took the necessary preemptive measures by ensuring that we would have a contingency plan at a point when there were clear difficulties with the NHS England and that company, and then we were able to operationalise those contingency plans despite the company having assured us on the 7th of December it could meet its contract obligations, but on the 20th of December telling us that it could not. So in a very short space of time, we moved to do that. I think I've probably missed one of your questions. Perhaps one of your colleagues, if they are going to make a statement or ask me a question, they could pick that up for you, and I'll be sure to answer it.
Right. The first two questions and answers have understandably taken a long time. There was a lot of content there, so we'll have to be a bit quicker if we're going to get through them all. And I call Alison Johnston to be followed by Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. On the 12th of September last year, SEPA issued 2 enforcement notices, and they followed those with a further 2 on the 11th of December. And within a couple of weeks, the company has given notice that it had ceased trading. Just for clarity, are we to understand that the government and its agencies were completely unaware of this impending crisis? And how frequent were SEPA's inspections up to the point at which the situation became critical?
Jean Freeman.
So I've never said that this government was completely unaware, that otherwise we would not have taken the necessary steps in knowing that there were difficulties between the company and health trusts in NHS England. We would never have taken the necessary steps to ensure that should there be a difficulty in Scotland in terms of fulfilling the contract, that we had those contingency plans in order to continue to ensure that clinical waste was uplifted, stored and disposed of in a way that protected both patient and public safety. So as soon as it became clear that there were difficulties south of the border, we understood, as I think I said in my statement, that there was the potential for problems in Scotland. But at that point, there was no significant difficulty. SEPA, as part of its normal inspection process, and in terms of the frequency, I'm happy to check exactly what that frequency was over the contract period and advise Ms Johnston of that specific number. But in terms of its regular inspection process, issued initially those 2 enforcement notices and then subsequently 2 further enforcement notices. And of course the company has time to comply with those notices, but then on the 7th of December advised us that they could not meet their contract obligations. We gave them the 20 days that they're entitled to get back into a place where they could. 27th of December, they advised us they'd cease trading.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Healthcare Environmental Services also held the contract for the disposal of animal remains and clinical waste from Edinburgh Zoo in my constituency. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary, are there still animal remains at the Shot site? What other non-NHS contracts did the company serve? And what contingency is being offered to those companies to facilitate the safe disposal of their clinical waste?
Jane Freeman.
My understanding, but I will check this and return to Mr Cole-Hamilton on this matter, is that where there is clinical waste for disposal, whether it is of animal or human origin, the contingency arrangements are picking up on that obligation. In terms of other non-HS contracts that the company had, I do not have that information. I don't know if we do as a government hold that information, that would be company information. So I'm unable to give Mr Cole-Hamilton that information to him this afternoon.
Now, we're more than halfway through the session. I do have a little bit extra time, but not much. So please, short questions and answers. Please, Philip McGregor, followed by Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Cabinet Secretary will be aware of reports of a build-up of clinical waste at a Coatbridge Health Centre in my constituency. I raised this as a supplementary in this chamber last week. The local paper, The Advertiser, have since again highlighted the issue and has had wide circulation. Can the Cabinet Secretary outline if the arrangements being put in place will prevent any future build-up of waste?
Jean Freeman.
Yes, I can. My understanding is that collections have returned to normal and are being monitored on a daily basis by NSS. There was clinical waste backed up at NHS sites, and this was due to a diminution in service from HES prior to ceasing trading and before the new arrangements were put in place. And of course, those new arrangements in some instances took a little bit of time to bed in, but now my understanding is that collections have returned to normal, backlog has been cleared, and they are being monitored on a daily basis.
Brian Whittle, followed by Alex Neil.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Last week, Cabinet Secretary Rosanna Cunningham estimated that the total clearance and disposal cost would be around 250,000. And I note from your statement, Cabinet Secretary, the Scottish Government has provided 1.4 million towards the initial contingency planning. I think with that in mind, are you confident that the costs will not continue to rise exponentially?
Jean Freeman.
Well, the 1.4 million, as Mr Whittle rightly says, is towards the initial contingency planning, and the NSS have now taken over the management of the contingency arrangements. Of course, what that means is that our boards are no longer paying HES for services that they are not receiving, and when we get to the end of the contingency period and the new contract starts, then we'll be able to rebalance the funding between what our boards would have normally paid to HES for the months in which has been contingency arrangements and the amount of money that NSS have paid out to cover those contingency arrangements. At that point, I will know if there is any gap between what would normally have been paid and what we've had to pay in contingency arrangements. And of course, contingency arrangements do carry additional costs because you have to bring in trailers, additional storage facilities and so on in order to make sure that you can continue to deliver the service. So when we get to the end of the contingency period and the new contract begins with the new contractor, then I will be able to give Mr Whittle and other members of this chamber both the exact cost of the contingency arrangements in full, how that is balanced against what our boards would have normally paid to HES, and whether or not there is a deficit between those two figures.
Alex Neil, followed by Jenny Mara.
Presiding Officer, as a constituency member for Shotts, can I thank the Scottish Government for all the tremendous help they've given so far to the workers who've lost their jobs at Hassockrigg in Shotts. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary if we can persuade the Government to give further assistance, because Neil Gray, my colleague, and I have brought in specialist lawyers, and it will take 6 to 9 months before people actually get their wages back and other payments they are due going through the normal employment tribunal process. Is there any way that some pressure can be brought to bear to speed up this process? And secondly, a very specific question for the Cabinet Secretary for Health. Could she, when the new contract is being awarded, put some pressure on the new contractor to give priority to recruiting former HES workers to carry out the new contract, particularly as TUPE does not apply in this case?
Jean Freeman.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In terms of the first part of Mr Neil's question, I would suggest that I ask my colleague, Mr Hepburn, to respond in writing to Mr Neil in terms of whether or not there is anything further that the Government might do to insist that employees receive the December wages, which I believe is what Mr Neil is talking about, that they are due. And I wouldn't want to intervene in another portfolio and talk about something I didn't know anything about. So Mr Hepburn will respond. In terms of the second part of the question, a very important part of it, NHS National Services Scotland, in conjunction with the Trediby Healthcare, are arranging an information and recruitment day to be held in Shotts in the next few days. And when we have the exact date for that, I will make sure that all relevant members, including Mr Neil and other colleagues, are aware of that date. But the employees of the former company will certainly be informed, and the new company who will take over the contract once all the conclusions of the negotiations are completed by the end of this month, will undertake that information and recruitment day, which I hope gives Mr Neil some assurance, but more importantly to those who have lost their jobs from HES.
Jenny Mara, followed by Emma Harper.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I back Alec Neil's call that there is no stone left unturned to make sure that these workers get the money that they are due? There are workers in Dundee are waiting for wages that are due to them as well. Can I also ask the Health Secretary, she talks about the cost of contingency plans to Health Board. Can I ask her, is the Scottish Government pursuing HES's insurers to see if the public purse can recover some of that cost from them? And my third brief question is just to clarify her answer to Ms Lennon. She talked about the 10-year contract being worth £10 million. We're just a little bit unsure of that because we understand from the press that 3 health boards made a payment of approximately £1 million for the last 3 months.
Speed up, Ms Mara.
So the £10 million doesn't really stack up. If she could clarify that, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Could I clarify for the Chamber that there are members here who are not going to get their questions because of the time taken by their colleagues? Jean Freeman.
Presiding Officer, can I first of all apologise to the Chamber for causing considerable confusion about how much this contract is. It's £10 million a year for 10 years, 100 million. So I hope that clarifies it. I hope that's in the record, and my apologies to the Chamber and to members for confusing everybody on that matter. In terms of no stone left unturned, I believe that the Government is doing everything that it can. Mr Hepburn has advised me that not only did he seek the company's permission to contact their bank, which was refused, he has now written to the bank on behalf of the employees to see if the bank can assist in ensuring that they receive the monies that they're entitled to. The other question that was asked from Ms Mara was about HES insurers, and we are seeking legal advice on that and a range of other matters in terms of the whole contract. I'm sure you appreciate that there are 3 portfolios involved in this from different perspectives, in terms of the environment, in terms of the employees and a business, and obviously my interest and concern in terms of the NHS. So we are looking at all the ways in which we may assist a resolution of this matter.
Emma Harper.
Thank you. I welcome the robust contingency plans that NHS Scotland have developed. Can the Cabinet Secretary confirm that these measures will remain in place until a new contract begins and that the new contract will, at the very minimum, adhere to these standards?
Jean Freeman.
I'm grateful to Ms Harper for that. The contingency arrangements will remain in place until the national contract is fully operational, so we will have no break in service. We will have the contingency arrangements continuing, the national contract beginning, and the contingency arrangements won't pull back until we are absolutely confident that the new national contract is fully operational. The new national framework agreement includes an updated specification, meets the current environmental targets of the Scottish Government and provides greater visibility of waste streams both locally and nationally, and of course a single contract for the whole of our health service in Scotland is exactly the way we should be doing this, rather than a series of individual board contracts.
And the last question is Alasdair Allan.
Given what she's just reported today about the bank and other matters, is the Cabinet Secretary satisfied with the level of engagement and cooperation that the Scottish Government has received from healthcare and environmental services since this situation first came to light?
Jean Freeman.
Well, no, I'm not. I don't think anyone is. I certainly don't think the employees of the company who are skilled and experienced and have worked hard have been treated either fairly or well in the manner in which they've been dealt with. It is a particularly difficult time of year, of course, at Christmas, to be told that you've lost your job, but to be told that with absolutely notice and not to be paid the wages you're due is completely unacceptable. So no, I'm not satisfied with the way in which the company has handled either its contractual obligations to our National Health Service or its absolute contractual and other obligations to its workforce. We have been trying, both Scottish Government and Scottish Enterprise, to cooperate, support and work with HES since the autumn of last year, offering a range of business support and support in terms of the workforce, and have had little, if any, cooperation at all. And in terms of the health service contract, to be advised in a very short space of time that you cannot meet your contractual obligations, and then in an equally short space of time to say you've ceased trading and that's it, you've packed up shop, is not the way, in my opinion, that anyone who takes contract obligations seriously would behave.
That concludes questions on the statement on clinical waste services. Apologies to Alison Harris, James Kelly and Shona Robson, who I wasn't able to call. Could quickly change places, please. We're a bit pushed for time now. The next item of business is debate on motion 15507 in the name of Kate Forbes on supporting entrepreneurship. Can I ask those who wish to speak in the debate? Can I also ask those who are leaving the chamber to do so quietly, please? My goodness. I'll say no more. Can I invite members who wish to speak in the debate to press the request to speak buttons? And I call on Kate Forbes to speak to and move the motion for 9 minutes, please, Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This government, and indeed myself personally as the Minister for the Digital Economy, has made clear that our ambition and our vision is for this nation of Scotland to be at the very forefront of economic and technological development. That means that we must be the inventors and the producers of future innovations, not just their consumers. We know that Scotland's people have more than enough potential to be world-leading in many fields, and indeed we're all very familiar with the innovators and the entrepreneurs of our past, names like Bell, Fleming and Carnegie, and more recently names like Farmer, Gloag and Hunter come to the fore. And like Sir Tom Hunter, this government agrees that we must ensure that we work together to make sure that our best days are still ahead of us, and that enterprise plays a very positive role for all of society. Now that, of course, is no mean feat, but there is another generation coming through with the ideas, the initiatives and the guts to give it a go. And I absolutely believe that we can accomplish that vision if we work together. So it's no wonder then that our approach is based on working with partners to nurture our existing entrepreneurial talent and create the conditions which attract international talent as well. And on that note, Presiding Officer, I do find it quite startling that the Conservative motion talks about attractiveness when their party has been lambasted in recent weeks and years indeed for single-handedly not just turning people off coming to this country, but actively restricting them from entering. Scotland Can Do embodies our strategy because, in sharp contrast to that small-minded, self-obsessed approach, which in the words of some business organisations is misleading rhetoric on immigration, this government is actively supporting home talent as well as attracting people to move to this country. And our approach through Scotland Can Do is a platform which we've developed with our public, our private and our third sector partners, which represents our shared ambition to become world-leading in entrepreneurship and innovation. Now, it is paying off, make no mistake. Since the introduction of Can Do in 2013, the effectiveness of Scotland's business support environment has risen from 13th in the world to 5th, ahead of all other parts of the UK. But I do not think that's enough. I think we need to go further. And that collaboration, which champions an approach where sustainable growth and innovation go hand in hand with the wider benefits to all society, is just the foundation which we must continue to build on. Indeed.
Daniel Johnston.
I thank the Minister for giving way, and I think in many ways she's absolutely right, but I'm wondering how her remarks that she just made square with the fact that funding for Scottish enterprise has declined by over a quarter since her party came to power.
Kate Forbes.
I thank the member for that question. And we make clear in the budget, in our draft budget this year, that support for business is at the very heart of that. And our support for our enterprise agencies, which includes, of course, Highlands and Islands Enterprise as well as Scottish Enterprise, have been treated fairly and consistently. But at the heart is actually the output, is the benefit that there is to the business community. And the stats that I just quoted in terms of the environment that is here, the support environment has risen. These are not my stats, has risen from 13th in the world to 5th, ahead of all other parts of the UK, is really where we must look to the support that businesses are telling us that they need, and to make sure that that support is not piecemeal, but it's this type of support that business wants. Where our focus has been applied, where we have prioritised, such as tackling the gender gap or ensuring that our young people see enterprising activity as the norm, the results have been positive. Where I do think that Labour's amendment actually highlights a very important point is recognising the importance of women in enterprise to ensure that that growth that I've talked about is indeed inclusive. And whilst the proportion of women who are actively starting a business has risen significantly since the Women in Enterprise Action Framework was established, there is clearly more to do to make sure that we leave nobody behind. These are achievements. Yes.
Oh, sorry, Elaine Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I do recognise what the Minister has been saying, but I think we also do have to recognise that the statistics show that less than 1/4 of new businesses in Scotland are being established by women. I think we should just make that point at this stage.
Kate Forbes.
I appreciate that point and I don't disagree with it. And a point I think I would make is that the value, if we were to encourage more women to be able to be in a position to start a business, it would be enormous for the Scottish economy. And making sure that inclusivity is at the heart of our entrepreneurship agenda is not just good for the entrepreneurs themselves, but indeed for the Scottish economy as a whole. We recognise that values and diversity must lie at the heart of our can-do philosophy. And organisations like the Scottish Chambers of Commerce, the Federation of Small Businesses, have made enormous contributions to those shared outcomes. Young Enterprise Scotland and the Prince's Trust have driven action. And as I already mentioned, Women's Enterprise Scotland and Investing Women are tackling some of the challenges that lie around the statistics that Elaine Smith highlighted. And there are, in fact, so many partners responsible for driving that impact that to name them all and their contributions would see us with very little time to debate. One partner, however, who does recognise specific recognition is Entrepreneurial Scotland, which is a network of and for Scotland's entrepreneurs. And it's at the very heart of what we're trying to achieve. At the weekend, I met Rachel Wallace, who works for Entrepreneurial Scotland, to ask her, aside from any briefings that I might get, what impact she sees Entrepreneurial Scotland having on the businesses that she is trying to support. And that entrepreneurial drive, which I could see in her herself, was very clear that being able to come alongside business and support them in the way that they ask for, rather than the way that the government wants to provide, is really making a difference. I briefly touched on values, and values has got to be at the heart of our approach. We've stated time and time again that our commitment to economic growth must be inclusive, and businesses that do good are much more likely to be successful and resilient. From the social enterprise strategy to the Scottish Business Pledge and our commitment to being a fair work nation, we have made clear our own position.
Dean Lockhart.
Mentioned inclusive growth. At the Economy Committee, we heard that the Government has no agreed definition of inclusive growth. When will the Government be able to tell the various agencies involved in the economy what it means by inclusive growth?
Kate Forbes.
I thank the member for that question. I do recall at one point my colleague asking Dean Lockhart which strategy he thought that the Scottish Government could leave behind, and citing inclusive growth being one of them, which of course we would never do. And in terms of inclusive growth, it's quite clear that we ensure that anybody who wants to access the workforce and who wants to access work and who wants to be an entrepreneur is able to do so, that there is a level playing field. But at the other hand, in terms of outcomes, that the outcomes from that growth that we see in the economy benefits everybody. And we don't see the continuing gap between rich and poor that some of Dean Lockhart's colleagues in the Westminster Government seem intent on driving bigger. And that means growth for more than its own sake. It means growth where positive social, environmental and community outcomes are a natural consideration. They're not an afterthought or a convenient side effect or a nice subject for a debate in the Parliament. It's growth where everybody is empowered to participate and from which everybody can benefit. And that sentence in itself is quite a neat definition. Yes?
The Minister's in her last minute. Oh. In fact, she's just winding up.
Having far too much fun taking... Thank you, Presiding Officer, in which case I'll rush to the end. We are all aware, and I'm sure we're going to have a very interesting debate, that there are headwinds approaching the Scottish economy that will inevitably impact on the ability of business to thrive. Just yesterday, the CBI again published some very scary, for want of a better word, figures for the impact on the Scottish economy in the event of a no deal. These are headwinds caused not by Scotland's businesses, but by decisions made elsewhere. And that more than ever underlines why we must work together with our partners in business to listen to them and to ensure that our support is right. That is the essence of our approach, and that is the reason for its success. And I move the motion in my name.
I call Dean Lockhart for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. The concept of entrepreneurship reaches back to the work of Adam Smith, and Scotland rightly has a long and proud history of creating new industries. Entrepreneurs in Scotland today continue to play a vital role in our economy, and their success must be recognised. They build new businesses and create new jobs, providing a boost to the local and national economy. They add to national income by generating new wealth and increased tax receipts, and they generate multiplier effects for the economy by creating new products and services. While we all recognise that entrepreneurship is a vital part of the economy, the reality is that no government can legislate for it. You cannot regulate entrepreneurship into existence. Instead, the role of government should be to create a dynamic skills, business and financial environment in which it can flourish. The importance of creating this dynamic environment was highlighted in a recent study by Grant Thornton, which identified that £4.3 billion of business growth is being lost to Scotland because of what they called an environment of barriers, including access to skills, technology, innovation and financial issues. I will in a second. I was about to say perhaps that's why business creation rates in Scotland continue to lag behind the rest of the UK, and perhaps that's what John Mason wants to explain. I'll give you.
John Mason.
I thank the member for giving way. He mentioned lack of schools. Is he not concerned that Brexit could lead to a greater lack of schools?
Dean Lockhart.
Well, the UK government has announced a new immigration policy which is precisely designed to align our immigration policy with the skills needs of the economy. So, no, I don't. Deputy Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government motion today sets out various initiatives supporting entrepreneurship, and we do welcome these initiatives. But a patchwork list of initiatives is not enough to create the right environment for enterprise. The Government motion also refers to the new Economic Action Plan. But this action plan is merely what the Fraser of Allender has described as a long list of government initiatives recording how money is spent. We need to do more to realise Scotland's entrepreneurial potential. And that's why our amendment today calls for the Scottish Government to take a more fundamental approach, an approach to create a dynamic skills, business and financial environment which truly supports entrepreneurship. I will, yes.
Tom Arthur.
I'm very grateful to Mr Lockhart for giving me, and I completely agree with him that skills is a key issue. Now, one of the key drivers of skills is, of course, our fantastic university sector. I'm sure Mr Lockhart will welcome as much as I do the figures that were released last week, showing 15.6% of university students are from the 20% most deprived areas, and that the Commissioner for Fair Access in Herald today, Sir Peter Scott, said that this SNP policy of free tuition fees was vindicated. So let me just...
Mr Arthur, I think that's a long enough intervention.
Does Mr Lockhart support
Mr Arthur, Mr Arthur, we are short of time for this debate. I've stated that already. Mr Lockhart.
Thank you very much. Let me address the question. In terms of the skills environment, there is a skills shortage in Scotland. It's doubled since 2011. Over the past 10 years, college student numbers have been cut by 150,000, and the CBI has called on the government to do more to fill teacher vacancies in vital subjects such as maths and science. What we're also seeing, and I'd mentioned this to the Minister as Minister for Digital, we're seeing an increasing digital skills gap emerging in Scotland. The Economy Committee has heard evidence that only 9% of business in Scotland use digital in their business, compared to 43% in other countries. This means that a number of new businesses in digital and technology won't be able to get off the ground unless this digital gap is addressed. And that's why we've been calling for the establishment of a dedicated Institute of E-commerce, a specialist agency that would help emerging enterprises take full advantage of the global opportunities in e-commerce. Very briefly, please.
Kate Forbes. Member talked about the need for skills. I wonder if he could respond to the FSP, who said that the UK government's obstinate approach to immigration is going to ensure that non-UK labour and skills will not be there for small businesses to grow and sustain their operations.
Dean Lockhart.
Thank you. I've already said the UK government has announced a new immigration policy designed to fill the skills gap. In terms of the business environment, we need to promote Scotland as a home for innovators. Entrepreneurs create jobs, they're business developers, and they support economic growth. Not only this, they tend to be top-rate taxpayers, contributing to government's tax revenues. Not surprisingly, we face competition from around the world for those innovators and from the rest of the UK. But instead of trying to attract these innovators to Scotland, the SNP is doing exactly the opposite by making Scotland the highest tax part of the UK for entrepreneurs. I've given way enough. Sorry. We also need a business environment that encourages entrepreneurs to scale up and expand their business base. But again, we have a government that does the opposite by inflicting the large business supplement on successful firms with the ambition to expand. Presiding Officer, let me turn to enterprise policy. Scotland does have a vibrant start-up scene, with many entrepreneurs looking to commercialise new ideas and innovations. But again, we see an enterprise policy from the SNP failing to provide the right level of support for start-ups across Scotland. The Economy Committee is currently concluding an inquiry into business support, including Business Gateway, the primary provider of enterprise support for start-ups. The committee has heard evidence, however, that because of a lack of funding and a lack of resource, business support for start-ups across Scotland is inconsistent and lacks expertise. We've also heard evidence that the number of start-ups receiving assistance has dropped to an 8-year low. So if we're serious about supporting start-ups, we must have a fundamentally... I'm sorry, I'm about to conclude. If we're serious about supporting start-ups, we must have a fundamentally improved system of start-up support. And when the committee presents its final report to Parliament, I urge the Minister to take actions on its recommendations. Presiding Officer, after 11 years of SNP government, we have a low growth, low wage, low productivity and low innovation economy, with levels of innovation in Scotland now in the third quartile of OECD countries. I would remind the Minister that all of these policy areas have been within the control of the SNP for 11 years. If Scotland's true entrepreneurial potential is to be realised, we need to see this SNP government change direction in economic policy and create an environment in which innovation and enterprise can flourish. I move the amendment in my name.
I call Rhoda Grant to speak to and move Amendment 15507.2. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Scotland has a long history in entrepreneurship. Unfortunately, most of it is historic. We need to lay the foundation that again encourages our entrepreneurial spirit. While there's little to disagree with in the government motion, statements of intent don't really build the foundations that we need to thrive. I attended the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association Women's Conference a couple of years ago, and they looked at women in business. A number of women addressed the conference and talked about their own experience, and for the most part, they had gone into business because circumstances forced them to. It was the difficulty of finding work that fitted into caring responsibilities that drove them to set up their own businesses. It was not a career choice or a burning ambition. It was what they needed to do to survive. Women's Enterprise Scotland published a report highlighting the barriers faced by women entrepreneurs. Their recommendations pointed to the inbuilt inequality in the way in which support is provided, meaning women are therefore underrepresented in the sector. That's detrimental to women and to our economy as a whole. Some of the issues they raise are amplified by others, such as the Federation of Small Businesses, as being true throughout the sector. The fragmentation of support, the missing middle, the transition between business gateway and the enterprise sector. I've also had constituents who find themselves being passed back and forth between different organisations because the help available by one is quite different to the other, and many businesses fall between all of them. Yeah. Businesses need seamless support. Yeah. When companies are trading successfully, they then become vulnerable to takeover from larger organisations that can then grow that business. And this indicates that there's a risk factor for companies looking to take the next step to grow and export. Therefore, they need support at that point. The loss of ownership of these companies damages our economy. They often become part of larger multinationals, so we lose much of the wealth they create in taxes as well as income. Therefore, if we're to maximise the benefits of entrepreneurship, we need to encourage and grow and nurture these companies. It seems to me that the system does not do that seamlessly. In addition, the support available is not always suitable. Enterprise companies tend to focus on account-managed companies which fit a narrow definition, while other potentially successful businesses get little or no support. We need to be more open to different business models. Again, the support for these can be fragmented. Co-ops and social enterprise spread risk while providing employment and economic benefit. However, their economic impact is sometimes overlooked, and therefore they don't get the support required. Very quickly, I'm short of time.
With me that some of the... Sorry, Julie Martin, your microphone wasn't on.
Would Grant agree with me that some of the issues around business support is that it looks for too fast a growth, and the women-led businesses tend to be more about sustainable long-term growth?
Rhoda Grant. Yes, I agree with that, but also there are gaps in the support provided, and that is most likely to be felt by women. And indeed, as I was speaking about co-ops and social enterprises, where they are overlooked as well. And there are expert organisations that help co-ops and social enterprises, but they need mainstream support as well to understand and encourage this form of entrepreneurship, and to support them and signpost them to that more expert organisations where necessary. And the same is true of sole traders in many rural areas. There is not the opportunity to grow a business because it's filling a niche locally. However, these businesses are crucial and an economic driver in those rural communities. And if they fail, there's a detrimental impact to the wider economy, but they are often overlooked because of their inability to grow. Add to that, as my colleague Daniel Johnston said, the falling enterprise company budgets. It's difficult, therefore, to see how the Scottish Government are supporting entrepreneurship. The Conservative amendment talks about the Scottish economy growth underperforming against the rest of the United Kingdom, and we agree with that. However, we do not agree that fairer taxation discourages entrepreneurs. Indeed, we believe the very opposite. Austerity damages our economy, and with it business opportunities for entrepreneurs. Austerity holds our economy back, and those who bear the brunt of that are the least well off in our society, and therefore we cannot support the Conservative amendment. However, austerity austerity handed down from the UK Government cannot explain the difference between the Scottish economy and the rest of the United Kingdom. Yes, there is uncertainty with Brexit, but that is shared throughout the UK. However, NDREF 2 proves to give more uncertainty to Scotland. I move the amendment in my name.
Can I say to everyone, we're really pushed for time today, and it's largely because of people going over their time, and it's unfair to their colleagues. Willie Rennie, 4 minutes.
Thank you for setting me up so nicely, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'll aim to keep within the 4 minutes. I do recognise the success of Scotland's entrepreneurial businesses and the contribution they make to employing people across Scotland. The Chamber need look no further than the East Neuk of Fife and the village of Pittenweem in my own constituency. That, according to the Federation of Small Businesses, is the 4th most enterprising town, with no less than 14.7% of its workers self-employed, an astounding 128% above the national average. I was fortunate to spend 16 hours on the night shift with one of those very businesses, the prawn boat, the Sanella. I can't say it was particularly easy. I didn't sit down for the whole 16 hours, but it was an example of the dedication that small businesses and business people make towards the contribution towards our economy. Small businesses are responsible for 7 out of 10 private sector jobs in rural areas, taking account of over 40,000 jobs in Fife alone, and almost double that in both of Scotland's biggest cities. Yes.
Kate Forbes, does the member welcome in particular that 2 of the most entrepreneurial villages in Scotland are in the Highlands?
I think we'll find 2 of the most entrepreneurial hamlets are in North East Fife. I'm sure if we look at the statistics very closely, we'll find that is very true. My father was a small businessman himself in the grocery business. I saw firsthand the dedication, the hours, the heartache that comes with running a business, employing people, and meeting the expectations of customers, who, of course, were always right. I want to draw the Minister's attention to the concerns raised by the Federation of Small Businesses surrounding the drop in both registered and unregistered businesses between 2017 and 18. The FSB have pointed out, they say, a decline in the number of Scotland's businesses spells trouble for our ambitions for our economy and our local communities, and that we need to create a stronger start-up culture. It is important that we take action to promote this culture, as the threat of an undesirable no-deal Brexit looms over our economy. According to the Scottish Government's own website, almost a third of SMEs believe that would be detrimental into them. And I looked very closely at the Conservative amendment today, and bizarrely, there was no mention of Brexit in their amendment, but I'm sure that was just an oversight. Women's Enterprise Scotland are right to highlight the barriers that are in place for women as well. We need to redouble our efforts to make that happen. The Scottish Government's economic plan has committed to delivering apprenticeships, as it should. But I want the Minister to go a step further. When asked if they know someone who has started a business in the last 2 years, the amount of Scottish people who answered yes was way below the UK average. When asked if there are good start-up opportunities where they live within the next 6 months, the amount of Scottish people who answered yes was below the UK average. Possessing the skills and knowledge to start up a business, below the UK average. We've got to do much better than this, because as we've seen from the statistics, these SMEs are at the heart of our growth and our economy. So,
Mr Rennie's just closing.
In my last minute, I'm very sorry. So what we need to do is to improve enterprise education in schools. That is the way to create that new culture, to encourage more young people to get into business. So I would urge the Minister to look at enterprise education in schools once again.
Thank you, Mr Rennie. We now move to open debate. Absolutely no more than 4-minute speeches, please. Stuart Stevenson, followed by Alison Harris.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And let me start by encouraging Dean Lockhart to walk a couple of hundred metres up the Canongate, cross the road, go into the Canongate Kirkyard, and in the northwest corner he'll find Adam Smith's grave. I suggest he reads what it says on it. But I'll just leave that for him for another day. Now, Presiding Officer, one of the things in the Tory amendment is about business startups. And so I had a quick look at one aspect of that by looking at the Companies House figures. And lo and behold, the quarterly figures, because the figures are published quarterly, show that the increase in registered companies in Scotland is going at about 4.06% per quarter. Guess what the figure is in England and Wales? 4.06% per quarter. So that's very similar. Now, I accept that the base is smaller in Scotland. I really am going to have time. Do forgive me. So I accept the base is smaller, and there are all sorts of reasons which I can't, in the time available, develop here. I do want to say a little bit about taxation, because, again, the Conservatives are focusing on that. The key thing that helps start businesses is that when you start, you have a tax-friendly regime. And the small business bonus is hardly a disincentive to small businesses. And it isn't replicated anywhere else in these islands. So I think this government has done absolutely extraordinarily well. And of course, by taking away student tuition fees, we're making sure the next generation is equipped to do the sort of things that we need to. I'm not going to, sorry, just for time. I'm halfway through already, so do forgive me. I'm sure it would be worth listening to, but I just don't have time. Now, we're supporting, of course, entrepreneurs, and we're supporting innovation, because the two are bedfellows. This debate focuses on entrepreneurship. And I think one of the things we've got to be conscious of is that when we support startups and new businesses and new ideas, not everyone we support will ultimately be successful. And one of the things I would want to know, which I found rather difficult to find, is what the failure rates are. Because if they're too low, we're being too unambitious in the way we support companies. In banking, which I worked as a technologist in, if a bank branch had no bad debt, the manager was instantly taken out of position because he was not being ambitious enough in his lending. If he had too much bad debt, he was also taken out and hung, drawn and quartered. So there is a balance to reach. But do recognise that there is risk associated with entrepreneurship. There's some outstanding examples, and I choose Gillian Martin and my constituency experience as one. In Frisworth, 10 years ago, 2 lads started Brewdog. 2 people, under the age of 30. Today, they've had to move to get a bigger site in Gillian Martin's constituency in Allan. That company is worth over £1 billion. And I very much welcome the fact that they're going to be supporting the BIDS initiative in Peterhead by bringing a Brewdog bar to Peterhead's main streets. That's absolutely terrific. I also think, in my very few seconds that I've got left, Presiding Officer, we need to also think about how we support entrepreneurs. In other words, entrepreneurs inside big companies. Best initiative we had at the Bank of Scotland was when Bruce Pitallo in the early 1980s said our objective was to double the size of the bank in 10 years. That was the single objective. Everybody in the organisation knew it. We did it in 7. Keep it simple, it works.
Alison Harris, followed by John Mason.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'm grateful for the chance to debate the topic of supporting Scotland's entrepreneurs. And I'd like to start by declaring a registered interest in this topic, having started an accountancy practice over 20 years ago. Before looking at how we support entrepreneurs, I think it's important to have a clear understanding of what we mean when we talk about entrepreneurs. When you hear the word entrepreneur, it's easy to think about the huge success stories. Andrew Carnegie, Sir Arnold Clark, or Michelle Mone, to list a few. But the term really relates to any individual who sets up an enterprise or business, because they assume the risks and hopefully the rewards that come with this. Entrepreneurs can take many forms: sole traders, partnerships and small limited companies. And so our local butchers, hairdressers, plumbers, mechanics, restaurants and nursery owners, they are all entrepreneurs. It's a very different environment to being an employee, as I know only too well. You have the excitement of the potential growth of your business, combined with the extra hours at working at night, and all the responsibility falls on your head. Being in business is not always easy, although anyone who is in business already knows that. There are so many uncontrollable factors that can get in the way of success. And so, taking that into consideration, the best way of supporting entrepreneurs is creating a business-friendly environment. These are the factors that we can control. I think it's also important to have a positive attitude to people in business, where success is truly celebrated and encouraged. The public face people see of an entrepreneur often hides the blood, sweat and tears involved behind the scenes. For entrepreneurs, the associated balance between the risks and rewards of this hard work needs to be perceived as worthwhile. In my region of central Scotland, in Falkirk, it has always stood out as a hub of independent traders and small business owners. The area has been synonymous with these entrepreneurs for decades. However, recently, some significant cracks have actually started to show. In the recent Business in Scotland 2018 publication, it was revealed that the number of businesses in Falkirk fell between 2017 and 2018. This fall was largely driven by a reduction in the number of sole traders and small businesses. We have long argued on these benches that the SNP sends the wrong message to businesses and indeed workers in Scotland. Just wait at the minute till the end, please. For example, many small businesses see no point in scaling up here in Scotland because they will be charged twice the level of large business supplement as they would in England. But last year specifically, the SNP introduced significant income tax changes. These made Scotland the highest tax part of the UK for anyone earning over £26,000. This sends the wrong message to people. It tells them, work harder and you'll keep less of your money. And it does influence business decisions with the entrepreneur deciding whether it's worth putting in the extra hours and their employees deciding whether to push for a promotion or not. There are clear knock-on effects. It hurts Scotland's already low productivity growth rate. Between 2010 and 2017, productivity in Scotland actually went down. We need to be incentivising entrepreneurs to set up businesses. It needs to be as easy as possible for them to scale up these businesses. We need employees to be encouraged to work hard and aspire for these promotions. Creating an environment where we accomplish these simple key principles is the best way for us to support entrepreneurs. Thank you.
John Mason, followed by Elaine Smith.
Thank you very much. On the Economy Committee, we've carried out a range of inquiries which touch on this subject of entrepreneurship, and I'll mention some of these as we go along. One inquiry, as has already been mentioned today, has been into business support, which we're just concluding, and that's had a particular focus on Business Gateway. Obviously, we can't go into the detail of our conclusions until they're published, but most of the evidence we've taken has been in the public record, and I think it would be fair to say that the picture across Scotland is a bit patchy in regard to Business Gateway. Some entrepreneurs have been very positive about the support and advice they've received from them, while others have been more connected to Scottish Enterprise or HIE, and others have got their business going with little public support. One of the things that has struck me has been the tendency for the children of entrepreneurs to become entrepreneurs themselves. Now, that is absolutely fine, but it leaves us with the challenge: how can we encourage more young people whose parents were employed by public or private sector organisations to think about setting up their own enterprise? The Scotland Can Do website says, quote, "An entrepreneurial mindset can be learned and a culture that supports it created," unquote. I agree with that. But the statement is that the entrepreneurial mindset can be learned. However, I do not think that it is necessarily easily learned, and will depend partly on the mindset that someone has to start with. Speaking personally, my father was an engineer and my mother was a teacher, and I don't think I ever seriously considered starting a business of my own. I assumed I would work for some organisation as they had, and that is broadly what I did in my career as an accountant. So the first challenge is to get more businesses started, but the second challenge is to get our entrepreneurs to grow them and not to have them sold off too soon before they have really fulfilled their potential, and that is sometimes called the fear of heights. If it's very quick.
Liam Kerr. Just effective broadband is clearly crucial to entrepreneurship, whether starting up or scaling up. So does the member have any idea when we'll see full coverage of broadband in the North East, where I am? John Mason.
Yeah, I think that is important, but I think it's a little bit off the subject of today's debate. Whereas a company like Skyscanner grew to a considerable size while it was independent, and therefore was sold off for more serious money when the time came, other companies have been sold off, as I think Rhoda Grant was saying, at a much earlier stage. And the feeling is that the Scottish economy as a whole has not benefited as much as it might have. Now, once again today, I find myself strongly disagreeing with the Conservative amendment. Here we have a party which keeps the major levers of the economy reserved to Westminster and is quick to claim the credit if they reckon their actions have contributed to economic growth. Yet London has been running the Scottish economy for over 300 years, whereas the Scottish Parliament has only had some involvement for the last 20 years. Perhaps, just perhaps, the reason the Scottish economy has not done so well at times, and risks continuing not to do so well in the future, is that London is running the show. As an example, Scottish unemployment is at a welcome low level. But the other side to that is that we do not have a lot of extra people available for any new jobs that might come along in the future, and there could well be a skills shortage fairly soon. With Brexit and the potential for Westminster stopping workers coming to Scotland, of course our economy would be likely to suffer in that regard. Surely the Conservatives would accept that if the Scottish economy suffers more because we need immigration and they put on immigration controls, then it is the Westminster Government which is responsible for the Scottish economy doing less well. I have slightly less problem with the Labour amendment, but they seem to want more expenditure and they don't tell us where the money is coming from. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I call Elaine Smith to be followed by Gordon MacDonald.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I just say that I have a voluntary registered interest as a non-remunerated Director of McQuick Limited Bagpipe Covers. Entrepreneurs come in all shapes and sizes and from all walks of life. They might be big business tycoons, some of which were mentioned in the opening speech, inventors, or someone turning a hobby or a skill into an idea for a small business venture. Unfortunately, though, what they most predominantly are is male. Therefore, I intend to focus on the issue today of women as entrepreneurs. In the Scottish Government's Economy Action Plan, as part of the Driving Entrepreneurship paper, it's made clear that collective efforts must be broadened to address the needs of women in enterprise and the creative sector. We're all well aware that new businesses are a key driver of economic growth, and as such it's vitally important that people get the help and support that they need to ensure success. Small business start-ups are not only good for our economy, but also for helping individuals into employment, both the business owner and those that they might employ. The Minister mentioned in the opening speech about the widening poverty gap, and of course it used to be that employment was a guaranteed way out of poverty, but clearly that is no longer the case. With 1 in 4 Scottish children living in poverty and 2/3 living in households where at least one person works, we can see that a job is not always the way out of poverty. And in terms of poverty, it is women who are amongst the poorest in our society, and therefore supporting more women into business and breaking down the barriers is particularly important. The Scottish Government's Action Plan for Women in Enterprise does seek to address a number of the challenges to women in business, but it is needed because women are still underrepresented in self-employment and in business ownership. Now, I noted that £400,000 was specifically earmarked for this financial year to help initiatives focused on women, such as the Ambassadors Programme. But I would be grateful for a comment from the Minister in summing up, because clearly we don't have time for interventions, unfortunately, about whether some funding can be specifically focused on tackling the lack of start-ups in areas of higher deprivation, women suffering health inequalities, and among those living in poverty and exclusion in general. And part of that could include specific funding for projects working with women with complex health needs for whom the mainstream labour market doesn't always fit. Personal control and flexibility is important in such cases, so I would be grateful for a comment on that. Women working in agriculture is also a specific area that needs more attention. At a recent women's dinner in the Scottish Parliament, hosted by myself and other women MSPs, Sarah Allison, Vice Chair, NFU Next Generation Group, spoke passionately about the opportunities for women in the farming and agricultural sector and the role that we can all play in supporting them. The Scottish Government's Women in Agriculture Taskforce has been working on this issue, Presiding Officer, and has just published an interim report. And the recommendations for training in that include short courses designed for women new to farming, practical as well as financial and management training courses targeted at women, and courses targeted at women to take into account their needs, including childcare. I believe this approach is already showing positive results, challenging the stereotypes of agriculture and farming as an all-male preserve. Finally, I would like to highlight the importance of harnessing women's existing skills and taking them seriously as a business proposition. One of the challenges in ensuring that women's business ideas, for example, jewellery making or beautician, etc., are not dismissed as hobbies and that they receive the support and the respect that they deserve. Sometimes relatively small amounts of funding can be enough to start up such a business, but getting that funding can be extremely difficult for many women. Presiding Officer, I do support the Government motion, but I support the Labour amendment and I certainly do not support the Tory amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. And I call Gordon MacDonald to be followed by Tom Mason.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Chambers of Commerce, in evidence to the Economy Committee, stated that Scotland has an enviable level of support for developing businesses delivered through local authorities, primarily via Business Gateway, the enterprise agencies and private sector organisations such as the Chambers of Commerce. Scotland is the 5th most effective environment for business support globally, up from 13th in 2013. This finding was supported by research carried out by the Hunter Centre for Entrepreneurship at Strathclyde University, identifying that Scotland's profile improved both absolutely and relative to benchmark nations. If it were a nation-state, it would rank 5th when included with the 28 innovation-driven nations on the Global Entrepreneurship Development Institute Index for the 2012 to 2015 period, comfortably within the upper quartile and behind only the United States, Australia, Denmark and Sweden. The most recent official figures for the number of registered businesses in Scotland records a 16% growth since 2007, with over 28,000 new businesses, including sole traders and partnerships, which grew from 54,000 to just under 69,000. In order to support new entrepreneurs and existing businesses to grow, there is a range of support from business incubators to innovation centres, in addition to the enterprise agencies and Business Gateway. Some might see that as cluttered, but the outcome is that Scotland's business survival rates are above the UK average. Scotland is ranked first out of the UK's 12 regions for 2-year and 3-year survival rates. When it comes to the 5-year survival rate for businesses born in 2012 and still active in 2017, Scotland's rate was 44%, again above the UK average. We do not often hear about business death rates, but again Scotland is performing better with a business death rate of 11%, lower than the UK average, with London the region with the highest business death rate, with over 86,000 businesses failing in 2017. Presiding Officer, in Edinburgh, the business support landscape has supported the city in becoming one of the economic hotspots of the UK. Codebase is the UK's largest start-up incubator, home to more than 100 of the country's best technology companies, bringing together entrepreneurs, world-class technological talent and top investors. In my constituency of Edinburgh Pentlands, the Edinburgh Business School, located at Heriot-Watt University's Riccarton campus, has a start-up incubator where successful applicants are offered free space and fully equipped offices for 1 year. In addition to the desk-based, the budding entrepreneurs have access to workshops, training and expert advice. In terms of business accelerators, Edinburgh has Scotland's first specialist fintech hub at the RBS HQ at Gogarburn, where innovative fintech entrepreneurs and start-up have access to similar expertise. Start-up finance is critical in ensuring that new businesses get to the point where they can start trading, and the Scottish Government is investing in the Scottish Edge Funds competition, which has had 12 rounds so far, investing in 350 businesses with 130 million of additional turnover and 1,600 jobs. I also welcome the proposal to reopen the Scottish Stock Exchange here in Edinburgh, creating 60 highly skilled jobs. So, Presiding Officer, in just the last year, the number of employers based in Scotland has increased by 900. If we can become the best place in the world to do business, then many more new and existing small businesses will grow to become employers, making our economy stronger.
Thank you very much. And I call Tom Mason to be followed by Gillian Martin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Scotland's current economic performance can only be described as mediocre. Growth forecast is lower than the UK as a whole for the next four years, and GBT growing half as quickly. Productivity at its lowest level in nearly 9 years, a far cry from the Scottish Government's goal being in the top quarter of OECD countries. Target set, target missed. So we need to do considerably better. It follows then that we must find ways of improving performance and productivity wherever we can. Slicker ways of working, less cluttered regulation and bureaucracy, and a much more enterprising nation, with new ways of working, new markets, products, and innovation in all that we do. Now, innovation comes about by experiment and risk-taking, and we look to entrepreneurial activity to achieve the success we need, to progress the economy at a much faster rate than we do at present. However, at best, examples of entrepreneurship are when individuals are able to take calculated risks that take advantage of market conditions, knowledge and experience. Therefore, innovative processes should take place both on a large scale in terms of business startups and on a small scale in every department in organisations across Scotland. I once asked the chief executive of a leading venture capital company who best to invest in, and he replied, "The person who really knows their market and has failed at least once, better twice." We need the element of calculated risk to push the boundaries of what we can achieve. I'm reminded of the words of George Bernard Shaw, who in 1903 said, "The reasonable man adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable one persists in trying to adapt the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on unreasonable man." And I apologise to females on that quote. So we need to find ways of encouraging such risk-taking, and if they fail, the consequences should not be too burdensome. With this in mind, investment in business support is vital. Not a cluttered Lancashire. Quick one.
Minister Kate Forbes.
Can the member confirm whether he is voting for Labour's motion which asks for more money, as well as his own motion asking for a tax cut?
Tom Mason.
No, I'm wanting for an environment where business enterprise and entrepreneurs can flourish. Money isn't necessarily the vital part of it. We need to fix flatlining R&D spending, and as we are the worst in the OECD countries, bar New Zealand. We need to sort out our unacceptable skills gap, which has doubled since 2011. We need to ensure that local communities have the powers they need to be reactive, flexible, and in order to deal with the unique challenges they face. We need to properly help the high street and take account of e-commerce. In order to compensate for risk, we must reward success where it occurs, encouraging investment and, importantly, profitability. Sadly, Presiding Officer, this is not the approach that was taken by the SNP. A business supplement double that of the rest of the UK puts Scottish business at a competitive disadvantage. Not my words, those of the Scottish Chamber of Commerce. Where's the incentive when Scottish businesses are paying an extra 190 million in taxes every year? This government must incentivise innovation, not treat it like a cash cow. We have so much potential as a nation, Presiding Officer. But we cannot realise it until such time as this right support is available from the Scottish Government. The current approach isn't working as it should. If everything was fine, we wouldn't have the fewer businesses across the country than last year, and all productivity at the lowest level since 2010. So I urge the Government to think carefully about what has been said here today, work constructively towards developing policies that are much better working, allowing innovation and entrepreneurship to flourish. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And in the last of our open debate speeches, Gillian Martin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Once again, I get the opportunity to highlight a significant number that I often mention when talking about Scotland's enterprise potential, and that number is 7.6 billion. That's how many pounds would go into the Scottish economy if the same amount of women as men started up in business every year. And the Labour Amendment makes specific reference to the work done by Women's Enterprise Scotland. And I'd like to take this opportunity to recommend that Rhoda Grant and Elaine Smith come along to my cross-party group in Women's Enterprise, for which WES are the Secretariat. We've done some great work over the last 3 years, including securing funding for WES and the training, enterprise training for women. Yes.
Elaine Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Just very briefly, I haven't been along. I will try and get along, but I did read some of the minutes and very interesting they were.
Gillian Martin.
Thank you. You would be most welcome, as would everybody else. Many of the women we've heard from in our cross-party group have been innovators, particularly in tech. We've also had sessions on women in agriculture, heard from women in areas of multiple deprivation starting up in business, and done a lot of work on access to finance and business support, usually concentrating on the lack of both for women and the unsuitability of current enterprise structures, which can be missing out on women's potential due to unconscious bias. In WES research, we found out that women-led businesses view growth as a sustainable, long-term process rather than a fast, high trajectory. And if you fit in the middle between small business and very large business, you can also be subject to not being able to apply for quite a lot of support. The focus on broader community measures such as employment, fair working practices, quality of service and product rather than just turnover. And over 3/4 of respondents to a recent WES survey stated that services should be more aware of the differences in support needs between women and men in business, with appropriate peer support being listed as particularly desirable. And that brings me on to this week, the deadline for applications for business ambassadors for Women's Enterprise Scotland, and I'm hopeful that one of my constituents, Lindsay Ritchie, will apply for that. Lindsay embodies the can-do spirit mentioned in the government motion. A small unit in the village of Newmarket, her business Kilt Wehay ships international traditional Highland dress and gift items all over the world. She employs 7 local people and a work experience student. And that's 7 people not having to commute into the city for work. Small businesses in small towns and villages providing local opportunities that are good for high streets, they're good for the environment and they're good for working parents. I also want to point out that Lindsay and so many other small businesses in my area are able to have premises with a shop front because of the small business bonus, thanks to the increase in the ceiling. The majority of high street businesses in my constituency now qualify for this vital support. Before I close, Presiding Officer, I want to also mention low-carbon innovation. For me, it's been very interesting leaving the Economy Committee as a member and moving on to convene the Environment, Climate Change and Land Reform Committee. And through our deliberations on the Government's Climate Change Bill, it's been glaringly obvious to me that our business and innovation support agencies would do well to have a focus on the potential of shepherding businesses who can be part of the low-carbon revolution, whether that be in the tech for renewable energy, bioscience that improves soil conditions, plant health and feed for livestock, or innovative agribusiness. There's a wealth of knowledge and innovative thinking in our environment and agriculture sector in Scotland that could be nurtured and could be exported to lead the way in the world as we face up to our climate change responsibilities. It really is ours for the taking if we have that focus. Untapped enterprise potential, that is the key to economic growth in Scotland. But it's also the key to so many of this government's priorities: equality of opportunity, environmental sustainability, fair work, innovation and internationalisation. Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. And we move now to closing speeches. Daniel Johnston to be followed by Jamie Halcro-Johnson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And with 4 minutes, this feels more like I'm taking part in a pitching competition than summing up a debate. But let me give it a go. Obviously, I need to refer members to my register of interest. I am a non-working, non-remunerated director of a retail business. I'm also a member of the FSB. And bearing that in mind, I've always struggled a little bit with the term entrepreneur. When you think of entrepreneur, you either think of Mark Zuckerberg or Del Boy, and I never felt I was either one of those things when I was working in business. What I did feel like I was constantly chasing my tail, trying to keep all the plates spinning, trying to make sure that I was making progress in my business. And I think one of the real points of consensus has been in the debate that is the essence of what an entrepreneur is. It is about hard work, but it's also about making the most of both your talents and the talents of those that you are working in your business. I think that was a point made very well by Rhoda Grant in her contribution. And I think it's also why it's right that we do focus not just about the whizzy high-tech businesses, but also about those people who are working very hard in more day-to-day businesses and looking at how we can support them to make so that they can make the most of those talents that they're seeking to use. So looking at the debate this afternoon, there is much that we can agree on, and indeed I think I'd also refer to the debate that we had last week looking at investment and business support and labour time. And I think there were 2 points of consensus there, that we do need to see how we can grow our middle-sized companies, and that needs to be done through a combination of investment and support. I think those are points that we can all agree on. And on that point, while I think there was much that we can agree on with the government's motion, unless we're really looking at about how we can genuinely stimulate that growth, tackle the underlying issues of productivity, there is a danger that the government's motion is piecemeal. But likewise, I think there is real issues with the Tories' approach to the debate this afternoon. There was much in Dean Lockhart's contribution that I could agree with. I mean, I agree with him that we need to have the right environment for enterprise. I agree with him that there's a danger, there's a patchwork of approaches and organisations. I agree with the need to do better on the digital skill gap. I agree with him that we need to fund business support more effectively. But how that translates into a motion that simply talks about lowering taxation as the sole instrument, the sole device through which we support our enterprises simply makes no sense to me. Because while I agree no business person likes paying tax, the reality is that growing businesses is as much about infrastructure that we invest through the public sector. It's about skills which we provide through our education sector. It's about making sure that we can plug those skills gaps, support businesses which need to grow to take new opportunities, which again is about business support. It is about the state and the private sector working in partnership. That requires public sector investment. The last time I checked, the best way of doing that is through taxation. And if you have an issue with that, if the Tories have an issue with that, may I gently point them in the direction of the Scandinavian countries or Germany, which have significantly higher levels of taxation, but seem to do significantly better than we do in terms of productivity. And on a final, I don't really have time. We must also celebrate the successes we do have here. And I think Gordon MacDonald did a very good job in terms of pointing out some of the successes right here in this city. We have a turnover from tech businesses of 1.14 billion, 212 startups in the last year, 10,000 tech jobs directly, 38,000 in associated efforts. And if we look at the why, it's because we have a highly successful university that has acted as a conduit of knowledge exchange and collaboration. And therein, I think, lays a hint as to where future success may lie for future enterprise policy in this country. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. And I call Jamie Halcro-Johnson to close for the Conservative Party.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. We've seen a welcome focus from governments at all levels on the need to back innovation, and I welcome some of the comments the Minister has made today. In what's been far too short a debate, we've heard a number of positive contributions from around the Chamber, and I'd like to draw attention to just a few of them. My colleague Dean Lockhart highlighted the increasing digital skills gap emerging in Scotland, something which you will be concerned about. And as he mentioned, the Economy Committee, in which we both sit, had evidence that only 9% of business in Scotland embed digital in their business. That's compared to 43% in competitor countries. There is a digital skills gap we have to address as a country, and I agree wholeheartedly when Dean Lockhart calls for the establishment of a dedicated Institute of E-commerce to help emerging entrepreneurs take full advantage of global opportunities in e-commerce. Alison Harris was right to point out that when we think of entrepreneurs, too often we think of the huge success stories, the Andrew Carnegies and Arnold Clarks, or, as Daniel Johnston mentioned, the Del Boys. But serial and successful entrepreneurs come in all shapes and sizes, from the person who sets up and runs a business employing thousands of staff to the person who may employ 5 or 10 people. But their reasons for starting their own business may well be the same. And Tom Mason made a really important point when he highlighted the fact that many entrepreneurs fail at least once. But what differentiates them from others is that they get up, dust themselves off, and give it another go, sometimes more than once. They learn from their mistakes, and it's their determination that drives them on. Daniel Johnston also highlighted the cuts to the budgets of the Scottish Enterprise and Highlands and Islands Enterprise. I haven't got time. We've only got a very short debate. Maybe more time should be put in for what is an important subject. He could also have mentioned that Highlands and Islands Enterprise also underspent on its budget for broadband rollout by over 45% last year. Willie Rennie has seemingly launched the Entrepreneurial Hamlet of the Year Awards, coming soon to the International Conference Centre, Pitt and Weem. Get your tickets as soon as you can. Elaine Smith touched on women in agriculture, and it's a good opportunity to mention the sisters Kirsty and Amy Budge, who are the country-file farming heroes in Shetland. The Minister and others also highlighted the importance of addressing the barriers to women entrepreneurs. This is all part of the Labour amendment that we can agree with. Unfortunately, we also feel that the amendment seems to discourage foreign investment into Scotland, which is a wrong message to send, so we won't be supporting the Labour amendment today. Entrepreneurship and encouraging more entrepreneurs is an issue around which we can hopefully build some consensus. There appears to be a recognition across this chamber that there have been shortcomings in our approach in the past, and the need to improve in the future. Scotland has suffered too many years of slow growth and failing to effectively upsize business from start-ups to significant-sized organisations. As I've already mentioned, in common with a number of speakers today, I have the advantage of sitting on the Economy, Energy and Fair Work Committee in recent months during our business support inquiry. We've heard a great deal of evidence about the functioning of both the enterprise agencies and at a local level business gateway. These will be key bodies in driving forward a cultural change in support of entrepreneurialism. One thing that does seem odd to me, however, is that Business Gateway, as a local authority-run service, does not seem to be better integrated to the other function of local authorities. If we are to embed enterprise earlier in the consciousness of young people, surely organisations like Business Gateway can make more of a contribution through their respective councils. More widely, there has been a very positive focus on collaboration today, and that is welcome. However, if we wish to see entrepreneurship have equal status in terms of careers we signpost to young people, we must give it parity of esteem. That will involve incorporating entrepreneurship at all levels. There are clearly unharnessed opportunities to build entrepreneurial skills as part of apprenticeships. I certainly know of one former plumbing apprentice who has all the skills to be a plumber, and having set up their own business is now having to learn how to run that business with all the additional skills that requires. He felt even the most basic business training as a part of his entrepreneurship would have been extremely helpful when he started down the road to setting up on his own. And while I was slightly disappointed when speaking to a group of about 12 MSYPs in Parliament last year, only one showed interest in starting up their own company, I appreciate this is not necessarily reflective of the aspirations of young people. Because I can also highlight the case of Australia in Orkney, who are in Kirkwall Grammar School's Young Enterprise team of 2017-2018. And they've gone on to be crowned Scottish Company of the Year. We must ensure that every young person who grows up in Scotland receives a rounded enterprise education, not only opening up new horizons, but also providing them with the practical skills required to run a small business. Presiding officers, this side of the chamber will welcome any new work from the Scottish Government to support entrepreneurs and break down some of the barriers that exist to starting up new businesses. Sadly, however, there's many policies of this SNP government that are holding Scottish business back. So long as the SNP continues to be an administration that values tax rises above creating an environment for the private sector to succeed, our economic growth will suffer. So too will our productivity, which this government pledged in its 2016 manifesto to tackle. Instead, the gap with the rest of the UK is at its widest level since 2012. Instead, we can and should be ambitious about our entrepreneurs and clear about the ways in which we can allow a truly entrepreneurial spirit to flourish in Scotland.
Thank you very much, and I call on the Minister to conclude this afternoon's debate.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'd like to thank all members for their contribution to today's debate. And above all else, I hope that entrepreneurs the length and breadth of this country feel that we have paid tribute to their efforts, whether they are in the hamlets of Fife or the villages of the Highlands or the streets of Edinburgh. They're the ones that have the success and who get up and go and who bear a lot of the risks of what we do. And many, perhaps, I think, of the issues that we've discussed today deserve time for greater reflection than we've been able to manage today. And it's clear, quite rightly, that supporting all of Scotland's people to realise their potential, no matter where they choose to realise it, is a priority that we all share, and that endeavour has to be a collective one. I want to start, though, by talking again about the Conservative amendment and the hypocrisy within it when it comes to talking about attracting people to this country. Because this is a party who gave up on attracting people to the country years ago with its restrictive immigration rhetoric and anti-immigration policies. And those anti-immigration policies have been lambasted by business over the course of the last few weeks for jeopardising the economy, for damaging the economy, for devastating the economy. And this is a government in the UK who, in the words of one business organisation, seems hell-bent on ignoring the business community when it comes to its immigration policy. So when it comes to attracting people, the Conservatives might want to figure out how to attract people before they lecture others on attracting people. But back to supporting Scotland's people and choosing to invest in Scotland's talent as well as attracting people to this country. That Scotland can do approach again makes clear that we'll only be able to do that if we are working across society with private, public and third sector partners. And I want to touch on a number of issues that members have raised. First of all, when it comes to growth support. And along with RBS and the Hunter Foundation, we created and continue to support the Scottish Edge Fund. Now, this private partner spun out of Scottish Enterprise has since 2013 awarded over £13 million to 350 businesses, supported the creation of over 1,600 jobs, with an increase of over £130 million of turnover, and helped to secure over £100 million of additional investment. And following our Economic Action Plan, the commitment to amplify can-do, Scottish Enterprise has invested a further £1 million into Scottish Edge. I want to also pay tribute to Gillian Martin and the cross-party group on Women in Enterprise and Elaine Smith's comments. In 2014, we launched with Women's Enterprise Scotland the first policy framework to tackle the enterprise gender gap, and the first anywhere in the EU, and now progressing through the Women in Enterprise Action Group with many other partners. And it's so important that we are working with other partners, which include Investing Women, the FSB, Scottish Chambers of Commerce and the Association of Scottish Businesswomen. We are together trying to drive change because we recognise that figure that Gillian Martin quoted about the huge impact to the Scottish economy if the start-up rate amongst women entrepreneurs was the same as men. And it's by working with and listening to those partners that we have started to achieve progress. Now, Elaine Smith specifically asked about investment, and I wanted to draw members' attention to the new digital fund which was in the budget, which I will be taking forward and specifically focuses on providing grant support to those who are furthest from the labour market to get the digital skills they need, the tech skills that they need, which are so needed in our economy today, to expand the workforce and to provide them with the support, recognising that in particular I would like to encourage women to be part of accessing that fund, as well as others who are furthest from the labour market. Yeah.
Dean Lockhart.
Thanks very much. On the point of digital skills, and as Minister for Digital Skills, does she support our calls for the establishment of a dedicated Institute of E-commerce?
Minister.
I support individuals and businesses who want to improve what they're doing digitally. We recognise that at the moment, industry tells us that we need about 12,800 new entrants to the digital workforce in order to stay keep standing without even starting to realise the huge opportunities that come with digital. And we're ensuring we're putting in place right now the digital funds, the digital growth funds for business as well as individuals, to make sure that businesses recognise the opportunities and individuals take advantage of the opportunities to retrain. Our shared mission is of an entrepreneurial society, and that actually starts with government as well. It means government needs to value an entrepreneurial mindset that we then support externally, and we want to see that entrepreneurial mindset within government, and we want to support startups, particularly through our procurement approach. And a core part of that approach is through CivTech, which is an innovative project that works with the public sector to disrupt normal procurement models and puts out problems for small companies to work towards. And that can often be the first step for small and medium-sized entrepreneurial businesses to get their foot through the door. So I think it's true that as I come to a close now, there is much to be optimistic about in terms of the business startup and the growth rates in Scotland. We are seeing success. We know that internationally, Scotland is the 5th most effective environment for business support globally. That is something to celebrate. But in light of the UK government's damaging proposals, not just when it comes to market access, but also in immigration, we know that we need to work even harder to make sure that Scotland's an attractive place for skills and talent, and that entrepreneurs choose to set up a business here in Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that concludes our debate on supporting entrepreneurship. Point of order, Mike Rumbles.
Presiding Officer, under Section 27A of the Scotland Act, the participation of the Scottish law officers, it says, and I quote, "They may participate in the proceedings of the Parliament to the extent permitted by standing orders." If I can turn to Standing Orders Rule 4.5, it says, "Participation of the Scottish law officers in proceedings. 1. This rule applies where the Lord Advocate and the Solicitor General are not members of the Parliament. 2. The Scottish law officers may participate in any proceedings of the Parliament as fully as any other members, except for voting and membership of the Corporate Body and Parliamentary Bureau. 3. These rules apply to the Scottish law officers when participating in any proceedings of the Parliament as if they were members." Earlier, in portfolio questions on justice and the law officers, I asked the Lord Advocates what the Lord Advocate's position is on the Scottish Government's competency to authorise another referendum on Scottish independence without a Section 30 order. Please note, Presiding Officer, that my initial question, I didn't ask what his advice was to the Scottish Government. I asked directly what his view was. The Lord Advocate was present. That's right. The Lord Advocate was present in the chamber, but the Scottish Government chose to have the Minister for Parliamentary Business respond. Now, I have to say, over the years, I hadn't thought of asking about the Lord Advocate's view, and because he's head of the Prosecution Service, and previously he's always answered questions to do with prosecutions. But last year, he entered the fray with the European Continuity Bill and responded to questions from MSPs in this chamber on his duties in there. So, in my earlier point of order, the Deputy Presiding Officer quite correctly pointed out that Standing Order Section A31 allows any minister to respond to an oral question in the chamber. So the letter, if not the spirit of standing orders, was complied with. I accept that entirely. That's all that matters, I hear. But it isn't. Could I therefore ask you, Presiding Officer, as Chair of the Parliamentary Bureau, to have the Bureau re-examine Parliament's standing orders to see if in this instance they are fit for purpose in allowing members in this chamber to directly question our law officers on their duties as they see them. If you, Presiding Officer, will raise this in the Bureau, and the Bureau decides that the standing orders in this case needs revision, could you outline the process that then needs to be followed? Thank you.
Can I thank Mr Rumbles? Order, please. Can I thank Mr Rumbles for advance notice of his point of order? Can I also assure him that I did follow all the earlier proceedings. I heard the question that the member put. I heard the response from the Minister for Parliamentary Business. I heard the further exchange with the Deputy Presiding Officer in the Chair. And as the member has highlighted, the response, which the member recognises is right, that it is up to the Government to choose which Minister to put forward to respond to questions to the Government. Having said that, I've looked further into this matter, and whilst I recognise the point and the concern that the member raises, it's in fact not for the Bureau to look at standing order changes. These are matters for the procedures, for the Standards, Procedures and Public Appointments Committee. If the member wished to proceed further, he may wish to write to that committee. That committee could in turn, of course, ask the Bureau for the Bureau's views, but that would be the procedure to follow. Thank you very much. We're going to proceed now to the next item of business, which is consideration of business motion 15515 in the name of Graham Day on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau setting out a business programme. And could I call on Graham Day to move the motion?
Presiding Officer, moved.
Thank you very much. And no one wishes to speak against the motion. The question, therefore, is that motion 15515 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. Thank you. The next item is consideration of two Parliamentary Bureau motions. Could I ask Graham Day on behalf of the Bureau to move motions 15514 on approval of an SSI and 15552 on a committee meeting at the same time as the Chamber?
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thanks very much. And we turn now to decision time. The first question is that Amendment 15507.1 in the name of Dean Lockhart, which seeks to amend motion 15507 in the name of Kate Forbes on supporting entrepreneurship, be agreed. Are we all agreed? No. We're not agreed. We'll move to a division. Members may cast their votes now.
Yes.
The result of the vote on amendment number 15507.1 in the name of Dean Lockhart is yes 28, no 81. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. The next question is that amendment 15507.2 in the name of Rhoda Grant, which seeks to amend the motion in the name of Kate Forbes, be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We're not agreed. We'll move to a division and members may cast their votes now. The result of the vote on amendment number 15507.2 in the name of Rhoda Grant is yes 82, no 27. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. And the next question is that motion 15507 in the name of Kate Forbes as amended on supporting entrepreneurship be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We're not agreed. We'll move to a vote. Members may cast their votes now. The result of the vote on motion 15507 in the name of Kate Forbes as amended is yes 76, no 27. There were 6 abstentions. The motion as amended is therefore agreed. The next question is that motion 15514 in the name of Graham Day on approval of an SSI be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. were not agreed. We'll move to a vote, and members may cast their votes now. The result of the vote on motion 1552 in the name of Graham Day is yes 82. There were no votes against. There were 27 abstentions, and the motion is therefore agreed. And our final question this evening is that motion yes. I've read out the number on the last motion. The last motion was 15514. But it was agreed. This motion is motion 1552 in the name of Graham Day on a committee meeting at the same time as the Chamber. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Thank you very much. And that concludes decision time. We're going to move now to members' business in the name of Colin Beattie.
Well, it's lovely to be out on such a sunny evening in Edinburgh, but it's a shame that we have to be out tonight protesting against the two-child cap and the rate clause. Well more than a year since Alison Thulis, my colleague at Westminster, first spotted it in the small print of a Tory budget.
Very glad to see such a huge demonstration today and so many people still coming along 1 year after the rate clause came into force to show their opposition to this vile and despicable policy. The UK government have never been able to justify this policy, and we saw that this week with Esther McVeigh's pathetic attempts to say that the rate clause was somehow double support for women and that gives them some kind of chance to talk about the most appalling and disturbing experience of their life.
As you can see behind me, we're at the very beginning of the All Under One Banner rally. You can obviously hear the pipers behind me as events are about to kick off.
It's time to aim high, look resolutely outwards, and never, ever accept second best. Above all, it's time to believe that we can. We can build that better country we know is possible. And friends, we will.
If you enjoy watching our programmes, please help us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster by signing up to become a Broadcasting Scotland supporter.
Wherever you stand, get the fresh view of what's happening in Scotland with iScot. Celebrate everything about our country with intelligent, in-depth insight from lifestyle, culture to puzzles, and all the opinions you'll need. Whether it's digital or by post, subscribe now to iScot.